I cared for my paralyzed mother-in-law for 2 years. Then I caught her walking at 2 a.m. My husband Matt came through the front door with his phone still pressed to his ear, and I knew something was wrong before he even opened his mouth. His eyebrows pulled together and his lips pressed into a thin line. The look that meant bad news was coming, and I was expected to fix it. "Mom got hit by a car," he said after he hung up. "The doctors are saying she might not walk again. Something about her spine." I hugged him and asked if there was anything I could do. Normal wife stuff. "She can't live alone anymore," Matt said into my shoulder. "She's going to need someone to take care of her full time." I pulled back. "We can look into home health aides or a rehabilitation facility." Matt shook his head. His jaw tightened in that way it did when he'd already made up his mind. "She's my mom, Aurora. I'm not shipping her off to some facility. She needs to be with family." I could feel where this was going. "We have the extra bedroom," he continued. "You work remote. It's temporary, just until she adjusts." "Matt, your mother doesn't even like me. She's made that clear for 4 years. She's changed. She told me herself. She said she wants to make things right with you." He grabbed my hands. "This is our chance to finally be a real family. All of us. Together. In this beautiful house your grandparents left you." Something about the way he said that last part stuck with me. But his eyes were red and he looked like a little boy who just found out the world wasn't fair. So I did what I always did. I put my feelings aside and told him we'd figure it out together. Sandy moved in 3 weeks later. She'd refused to let us visit her while she recovered. Said she was too embarrassed to have anyone see her like that. Said she needed time to process before she could face family. Matt thought it was understandable. I thought it was strange, but I kept my mouth shut. Matt wheeled her through the front door in a wheelchair she said she'd bought herself because the hospital ones were uncomfortable. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her legs sat motionless under a blanket, and her hands gripped the armrests like she was afraid of falling. "Thank you so much for having me," Sandy said when Matt positioned her in the living room. She grabbed my hand and squeezed it with both of hers. "I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I'm so grateful you're willing to open your home to me." "Of course," I said. "Your family. This house is just lovely." Sandy looked around the room with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your grandparents had wonderful taste. Matt told me they left it to you free and clear. No mortgage. That must be such a relief." "It is. You're very lucky. Most young couples struggle for years to afford something like this." She squeezed my hand again. "And now you're sharing it with me. That's so generous." Her voice was sweet. Her smile was warm. Her eyes crinkled at the corners like she genuinely meant every word. But when Matt turned away to grab more bags from the car, Sandy's grip on my hand tightened just a little too hard. Her smile stayed exactly the same, but her eyes changed. They got sharper, colder, like she was looking at something she'd been waiting a very long time to destroy. Then Matt came back and Sandy's eyes went soft again. She patted my hand and asked if it would be too much trouble to get her a glass of water. I went to the kitchen and stood at the sink. This was my house. The house my grandparents left me when they passed. The house I'd grown up visiting every summer. They'd saved their whole lives to buy this place, and they'd left it to me because they knew how much I loved it. And now Sandy was sitting in my living room asking about my mortgage. I brought her the water with a smile. She thanked me and called me sweetheart and told Matt he'd found himself a good one. Matt beamed at both of us like we were finally becoming the family he'd always wanted. Sandy moved into my house, the house my grandparents left me. She smiled when Matt carried her bags in, thanked me for being so generous, told me how grateful she was. But I saw the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't watching. This wasn't gratitude. This was something else. I didn't know what she was planning yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever game Sandy thought she was playing, she picked the wrong daughter-in-law. The first week was hard. The second week was harder. By the third week, I couldn't remember what my life looked like before Sandy moved in. My entire existence had narrowed down to a series of tasks that never ended. Wake up, change Sandy, feed Sandy, bathe Sandy, entertain Sandy, put Sandy to bed, repeat forever. My alarm went off at 6 every morning. Not because I wanted to wake up that early, but because Sandy needed to be changed before she developed bed sores. I'd drag myself out of bed while Matt slept peacefully beside me and shuffle down the hallway to the room that used to be my home office. The room where I used to work on projects I cared about. The room where I used to feel like myself. Now it smelled like medicine, an old person, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Sandy was always awake when I got there. Always watching the door like she'd been waiting for me. Always with that same sweet smile that never quite reached her eyes. She'd greet me the same way every morning like we were reading from a script. "Good morning, sweetheart," she'd say in that sugary voice. "I hope I didn't wake you with my tossing and turning. I tried to be quiet, but you know how it is when you can't move your legs. You just lay there and stare at the ceiling all night. It's torture, really. But I don't want to complain. You're already doing so much for me." The first time I changed her, I cried in the bathroom afterward for 20 minutes. Not because it was gross, although it definitely was, but because I was 29 years old, and I'd just given up my entire life to become a full-time caretaker for a woman who had openly told her friends I wasn't good enough for her son. A woman who had made my wedding day miserable. A woman who had spent 4 years finding ways to make me feel small and worthless. And now I was wiping her like a baby, and she was thanking me with that smile that made my skin crawl. Matt had convinced me to quit my job 2 weeks after Sandy moved in. He sat me down one night after Sandy went to sleep and explained why it made sense. He said I was already working from home anyway, so it wasn't like I'd miss the office. He said Sandy needed someone there all the time, and we couldn't afford to hire a professional caretaker. He said his salary could cover our bills since we didn't have a mortgage payment thanks to my grandparents. He said it would only be temporary until Sandy adjusted and we figured out a better solution. "You're the only one she trusts," he told me when I tried to push back. "She doesn't want strangers touching her. She barely even wants me helping her because she's embarrassed. But she likes you, Aurora. She told me herself. She said you're the daughter she never had." I almost laughed in his face when he said that. Sandy had called me a lot of things over the years, but daughter was never one of them. Gold digger, social climber, that woman. Those were the words she used when she didn't think I could hear. Those were the words she whispered to her friends at family gatherings while I stood in the kitchen pretending not to notice. But Matt looked so hopeful standing there, so convinced that his mother had finally come around, so desperate to believe that everything was going to work out. And I was so tired of fighting battles I never won. So I quit my job and became Sandy's full-time nurse and tried to tell myself it was the right thing to do. The bathing was the worst part of my new life. Every other day I had to lift Sandy's dead weight from the wheelchair to the shower bench. She couldn't help at all, according to her. Just sat there limp while I strained my back trying not to drop her. I'd wash her hair and scrub her body and try not to think about how my own grandmother had warned me about Sandy at my wedding reception. "That woman has ice in her veins," Grandma Rose had whispered to me while we stood by the cake table. "I've seen her type before. She'll smile at you while she's sharpening the knife. Don't ever trust her, Aurora. Don't ever let your guard down around her." Grandma Rose passed away 6 months after my wedding. She left me this house and enough money to pay off my student loans completely. Matt had been so excited when we moved in. He kept talking about how perfect it was, how we'd never have to worry about rent or mortgage payments, how this was our fresh start as a married couple, how lucky we were that my grandparents had worked so hard their whole lives so we could benefit from it now. I should have paid more attention to how interested he was in the inheritance. I should have noticed the way his eyes lit up whenever he talked about the house or the money. But I was in love and I was stupid and I thought he loved me too. The feeding took forever every single day. Sandy had very specific requirements about what she could eat and how it needed to be prepared. Soft foods only because she claimed her jaw hurt from the accident. Cut into tiny pieces because she said she had trouble swallowing. Served at exactly the right temperature because anything too hot or too cold made her stomach upset. If anything was even slightly off, she'd push the plate away and sigh dramatically and say she just wasn't hungry. "It's fine," she'd say when I offered to make something else. "I'll just skip this meal. Don't worry about me. I know I'm already such a burden to you. The last thing I want to do is cause more trouble by being picky about food. I'll survive. I always do." Then she'd look at me with those sad puppy dog eyes, and I'd spend another hour in the kitchen trying to make something she'd actually eat. And the whole time I'd feel like a monster for being tired. Like I was the worst person in the world for wanting 5 minutes to myself. Like I should be grateful for the opportunity to serve this woman who had never shown me an ounce of genuine kindness. The guilt trips were constant and relentless. Sandy had a way of making everything I did feel insufficient. If I cooked her breakfast, she'd mention how her own mother used to make breakfast for her every morning without ever complaining. If I helped her into the wheelchair, she'd wince and say I was too rough, even though I was being as gentle as possible. If I took a 15-minute break to eat my own lunch, she'd call for me constantly with increasingly urgent requests, until I gave up and went back to tending to her needs. "You're so lucky," she told me one afternoon while I was rubbing lotion on her legs to prevent dry skin. "You get to stay home all day in this beautiful house. No commute, no boss breathing down your neck, no coworkers to deal with. Some people would kill for this life. Some people would be grateful to have what you have." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her that this wasn't a life, it was a prison sentence. I wanted to remind her that I used to have a career and friends and hobbies and a sense of self that didn't revolve around changing her adult diapers. But I didn't say any of that. I just kept rubbing the lotion and nodding along like the good little caretaker I'd become. She loved reminding me about the wedding. Little comments here and there that sounded innocent if you didn't know the history between us. She'd be watching television and suddenly mention how beautiful the flowers were at my reception. "Such a shame I wasn't involved in choosing them," she'd add with a sad little sigh. "I have wonderful taste in floral arrangements. Everyone says so. But you wanted what you wanted and that's fine. It was your day after all. I was just the groom's mother. What do I know?" Or she'd be flipping through a magazine and stop on a picture of a wedding cake. "This reminds me of yours," she'd say thoughtfully. "Although yours was a bit plain, don't you think? I would have added more layers, more detail, more elegance. But you were on a budget, I suppose. Can't expect champagne taste on a beer budget, as they say." 4 years later, and she was still bitter about the wedding. 4 years of holding on to that grudge like it was the most precious thing she owned. I'd told her she couldn't control the guest list. I'd told her the wedding was about me and Matt, not about her. I'd told her no when she demanded I change the venue and the flowers and the music and everything else she wanted to change. And apparently she'd never forgiven me for any of it. About 8 months into taking care of her, she caught me completely off guard. I was brushing her hair before bed like I did every night, and she was being unusually quiet. Usually she'd use this time to complain about something or tell me stories about Matt's childhood that were clearly designed to make me feel inadequate. But this night she was silent, just sitting there looking at herself in the mirror with a thoughtful expression. Then she caught my eye in the reflection and smiled. A different kind of smile than usual. Softer. More vulnerable. You know, she said in a quiet voice, I never did apologize for how I acted at your wedding. I was awful that day. Just awful. I said things I shouldn't have said. I made a scene when I should have been celebrating my son's happiness. I was selfish and petty, and I'm ashamed of myself. I froze with the brush in my hand. Sandy had never once acknowledged her behavior at my wedding. Not in 4 years. Not even close. She'd always acted like everything she did was perfectly justified, and I was the one being unreasonable for being upset about it. I was just so scared of losing my son, she continued. Her voice got thick like she was about to cry. He's all I have in this world, Aurora. After his father left when Matt was just a baby, I put everything into raising that boy. Every ounce of energy I had went into making sure he had a good life. And then you came along and suddenly he didn't need me anymore. He had you. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me desperately wanted this to be real. Part of me had been waiting 4 years for Sandy to acknowledge what she'd done and apologize for it. I know I made your wedding day harder than it should have been, Sandy said. She reached up and patted my hand where it rested on her shoulder. I know I didn't make you feel welcome in this family. And I'm sorry. I truly am. You didn't deserve that. You've never deserved any of the awful things I've said and done to you. I felt tears burning in my eyes. After 4 years of coldness and judgment and thinly veiled insults, Sandy was finally apologizing. Maybe Matt was right all along. Maybe she really had changed. Maybe almost dying in that accident had given her a new perspective on life. Maybe we could actually be a real family now. Thank you, I said quietly. That means a lot to me. Sandy smiled at me in the mirror, but there was something in her expression that didn't quite match her words. Something hard underneath the softness. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. Like she'd accomplished something she'd been working toward. I just want us to be a real family, she said sweetly. Don't you want that too? I nodded and finished brushing her hair and helped her into bed. I kissed her forehead the way she always asked me to and turned off the light and closed the door behind me. Then I walked into the kitchen and found Matt eating cereal over the sink like he always did when he thought I wasn't looking. We need to hire help, I said. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was too tired to care. A home health aide. Someone to give me a break. Even just a few hours a week so I can remember what it feels like to be a human being instead of a full-time nurse. Matt set down his cereal bowl and looked at me with that expression he got when I was inconveniencing him. The slight tightening around his eyes. The tiny downturn of his mouth. The way his shoulders pulled back like he was bracing for an argument he didn't want to have. We talked about this, he said. We can't afford it. We can afford it. We don't have a mortgage payment. We barely have any bills. Your salary covers everything with money left over every month. We can absolutely afford a few hours of professional help. It's not just about money. Matt's voice got that edge to it. The one that meant I was pushing too hard and needed to back off. My mom doesn't want strangers in the house. She barely tolerates me helping her. If we bring in some random person she doesn't know, she's going to feel violated and humiliated. I'm not doing that to her after everything she's been through. And what about me? I could feel my voice rising, but I couldn't stop it. I feel violated every single day, Matt. I've given up my career. I've given up my friends. I've given up any semblance of a normal life to take care of your mother around the clock. And you won't even consider hiring someone to give me a few hours off each week. Matt's jaw clenched tight. Don't yell at me. I've had a long day at work and I don't need to come home to this. I'm not yelling. I'm telling you that I'm drowning here. I need help. I need my husband to actually support me for once instead of just expecting me to handle everything by myself. And I need you to understand that my mother is going through something traumatic. She was hit by a car, Aurora. She lost the ability to walk. She's dealing with enough without you adding guilt and resentment to her situation. So I should just keep suffering in silence. Is that what you're saying? I should just smile and pretend everything is fine while my entire life falls apart? Matt slammed his hand on the counter. The sound echoed through the kitchen and made me flinch backward. He'd never done anything like that before. In 4 years of marriage, he'd never raised his voice or hit anything or showed any sign of physical anger. Maybe, he said in a low, dangerous voice, the problem isn't my mother. Maybe the problem is you. I stared at him across the kitchen. What is that supposed to mean? It means you've been paranoid and negative since the day she moved in. It means you look for reasons to be upset about everything. It means you're so determined to hate her that you can't see she's actually trying to make things work between you two. I don't hate her. I'm exhausted. There's a difference. You're always exhausted. You're always complaining. You're always finding something wrong with everything I do and everything she does. He shook his head with disgust. I thought we were building a family here. I thought you wanted that too. But clearly I was wrong. I do want that, but I also want a partner who listens to me, who believes me when I tell him I'm struggling, who doesn't dismiss everything I say because his mother told him a different story. Matt was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed and rubbed his eyes like I was giving him a headache just by existing. Maybe you need to talk to someone, he said finally. A therapist. Someone who can help you work through whatever's going on in your head. Because this constant negativity is not healthy, Aurora. It's not normal. And I'm starting to worry about you. I felt like I'd been slapped across the face. My own husband was standing in front of me suggesting I needed therapy because I'd asked for help with his mother. Like I was the one with the problem. Like I was the one who was broken. Fine, I said quietly. I'll figure it out myself. I walked past him and went to the bedroom and closed the door. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there in the dark, listening to Matt snoring beside me and wondering how my life had gotten so small so fast. But something else happened that night too. Something I couldn't ignore no matter how hard I tried. Around 3 in the morning, I got up to use the bathroom. I was walking past Sandy's room when I heard movement inside. Not tossing and turning like someone who couldn't sleep. Something else. Something that sounded almost like footsteps moving across the floor. I stopped outside her door and listened with my heart pounding in my chest. The sound stopped immediately. Like whoever was making it suddenly realized someone was there and froze. I stood in that hallway for a full minute holding my breath. Then I shook my head and told myself I was imagining things. Sleep deprivation does strange things to your brain. I was exhausted and stressed and paranoid. Just like Matt said, I was hearing things that weren't there. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing other things. Things that didn't add up no matter how I looked at them. Sandy's legs had muscle tone. I'd been washing and lotioning them for months. I knew exactly what they looked like. And they didn't look like legs that hadn't moved in over a year. The muscles were firm and defined like someone who exercised regularly. When I'd researched paralysis online, everything said that unused muscles atrophy and waste away within months. Sandy's legs looked better than mine. Her foot moved during a transfer one morning. I was lifting her from the bed to the wheelchair and her left foot pushed against the mattress. Just for a second. Just enough to help her scoot forward. Then it went limp again like nothing happened. Like her body had acted on reflex and then remembered it wasn't supposed to. Her body shifted positions when I left the room. I'd position her a certain way in bed and come back 10 minutes later and she'd be in a completely different position. Not dramatically different, but different enough that she'd have to have moved herself somehow. Different enough that a paralyzed person couldn't have managed it. I brought it up to Matt one night after Sandy went to sleep. I chose my words carefully because I knew how he'd react. I think something's going on with your mom, I said. I've been noticing some things that don't quite add up. Things that seem strange for someone with her condition. Matt looked up from his phone with a bored expression. What kind of things? Her legs. They have muscle tone. Way more than they should have after over a year of not walking or moving at all. And I've seen her foot move. And sometimes she's in a different position than I left her in when I come back into the room. Matt stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed. Not a nice laugh. A dismissive, condescending laugh that made me feel 2 inches tall. Are you serious right now? He said. You think my paralyzed mother is what? Faking being paralyzed? Is that really what you're trying to say to me? I'm not saying that exactly. I'm saying something doesn't add up and I think we should at least look into it. Maybe take her to see a specialist or something. Take her to see a specialist because you think she's lying about being paralyzed. Do you hear how crazy that sounds coming out of your mouth? It's not crazy. I'm telling you what I've observed with my own 2 eyes. Matt put down his phone and rubbed his temples like I was the source of all his headaches. Aurora, you're exhausted. You've been under a lot of stress for a long time. I think maybe you're seeing things that aren't actually there. Your brain is playing tricks on you. I know what I saw. Do you though? Because it sounds like you're looking for reasons to be upset. It sounds like you're so unhappy with the situation that you're inventing problems to justify your feelings about my mother. I'm not inventing anything. Matt stood up and walked over to where I was sitting. He put his hands on my shoulders and looked into my eyes with that concerned expression that always made me feel like a child being scolded by a patient parent. Maybe you should talk to someone, he said gently, about your mental health. Because accusing my paralyzed mother of faking her injury is not a normal thing to think, Aurora. That's not something a healthy person would say. I'm worried about you. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until he actually heard the words coming out of my mouth. I wanted to make him see what I was seeing. But I could tell from the look on his face that nothing I said would matter. He'd already decided I was the crazy one. He'd already picked his mother's side without even considering that I might be right. Fine, I said quietly. Maybe I'm wrong. Matt kissed my forehead like I was a child who needed comforting. You're just tired. Get some rest. Things will look different in the morning. I promise. He went to bed and I sat in the living room for a long time staring at the wall and thinking about everything that had happened. Matt didn't believe me. He thought I was losing my mind. He thought I was so broken by exhaustion that I was making up elaborate lies about his precious mother. But I knew what I saw. I knew Sandy's foot pushed against that mattress. I knew her muscles shouldn't look like that. I knew something was very wrong with this entire situation, and if my husband wasn't going to help me find the truth, I was going to have to find it myself, no matter what it took. Matt called me paranoid, exhausted, said I was imagining things. Maybe I needed to see someone about my mental health. He picked his mother over me without even blinking. But here's what neither of them understood. I wasn't crazy. I knew what I saw with my own eyes. And if my husband wouldn't help me find the truth about what was really going on, I'd find it myself. I started testing Sandy the very next day. Small things at first. Things that could be explained away as accidents or coincidences if I was wrong. I needed to be sure before I accused anyone of anything. I'd drop something heavy near her feet and watch for a reaction. A pot lid on the tile floor. A book off the shelf. Anything that would make a loud, sudden noise. I'd leave her pills on the far side of the table instead of right in front of her where she could reach them. I'd make sudden, loud noises when she thought I wasn't paying attention to her. Sandy was good at her act. I'll give her that much credit. She was really good at pretending to be helpless. Every time I tested her, she'd sit there with that blank expression like nothing had happened, like the noise hadn't startled her, like she hadn't even noticed. But she wasn't perfect. Nobody is perfect at pretending all the time. The first real slip happened on a Tuesday morning. I was making lunch in the kitchen and I deliberately dropped a pot lid on the tile floor. The crash was loud enough to make me jump even though I was expecting it. Loud enough to echo through the whole house. From the living room I heard Sandy gasp. Not a normal surprised gasp. A startled gasp. The kind where your whole body flinches because the sound scared you. The kind of reaction that involves your legs tensing up reflexively, even if you don't want them to. I walked into the living room with a concerned expression painted on my face. Everything okay in here? I dropped something in the kitchen. Sorry about the noise. Sandy was sitting exactly where I'd left her in the wheelchair, but her hands were gripping the armrests so tight her knuckles had turned white. Her shoulders were up around her ears like she'd tensed her entire body. Like every muscle had reacted to the sound, including the ones that supposedly didn't work anymore. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said in that perfectly calm voice. "Just the noise startled me is all. You know how us old ladies are. Jumpy about everything." I smiled and nodded and went back to the kitchen, but I noticed something before I left. Her legs were positioned differently than before. Just slightly. Like she'd drawn them up instinctively when she heard the crash and hadn't quite gotten them back to the right position before I walked in. Like her body had betrayed her for just a second before she remembered she was supposed to be paralyzed. I filed that information away and kept watching. The second slip happened about a week later. I'd put Sandy's afternoon pills on the nightstand across the room instead of on her bedside table where she could reach them. Then I told her I was going to take a long shower and I'd be back in about 20 minutes to check on her. I didn't take a shower. I stood in the hallway outside her door with my back pressed against the wall and waited. My heart was pounding so loud I was afraid she'd hear it through the door. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Sandy lay in bed staring at the ceiling just like she always did when she thought I was watching. Patient. Still. The perfect picture of a paralyzed woman who couldn't do anything for herself. Then her head turned toward the nightstand, toward the pills that were too far away for her to reach without getting out of bed. I watched through the tiny crack where the door didn't quite close all the way. I saw Sandy push herself up on her elbows. I saw her eyes go to the hallway first, checking, making sure she was alone, making sure nobody was watching her. Then she started to move her legs. I held my breath so hard my lungs burned. Her left leg shifted under the blanket, then her right. She was getting ready to swing them over the side of the bed, getting ready to stand up and walk across the room like she'd probably been doing every single night when she thought everyone was asleep. Then she stopped. Her head whipped toward the door, toward me. I stepped back just in time, pressed myself flat against the wall, held perfectly still and didn't breathe. I heard her settle back into the pillows with a frustrated little sigh. "Aurora," she called out in that sweet honey voice. "I forgot to take my pills and they're all the way across the room. Would you mind bringing them to me when you're done with your shower?" My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I waited a full minute before responding so my voice wouldn't shake. "Of course," I called back. "Be right there." I took a fake shower, turned on the water and stood outside the bathroom door listening to the house. But Sandy didn't make any more attempts to move. She just lay there waiting for me like the helpless, paralyzed woman she was pretending to be. After that, I knew for certain. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't seeing things that weren't there like Matt kept insisting. Sandy could move her legs. Sandy could walk. And she'd been lying to all of us for almost 2 years. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. I needed to catch her in the act so completely that Matt couldn't dismiss it as my exhaustion, or my paranoia, or my mental health problems. I needed to see it with my own eyes and make sure there was no other explanation. I came up with a plan. I told Sandy I was going to spend the night at my sister's place. I said I needed a mental health break after everything that had been going on. I said I'd been feeling overwhelmed lately, and I thought some time away from the house would help me reset and come back refreshed and ready to take care of her again. Sandy was sweeter than she'd ever been about it. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, patting my hand with both of hers. Her touch made my skin crawl, but I kept smiling like nothing was wrong. You've been working so hard taking care of me. You deserve a break. Go be with your family. Have a glass of wine and relax. Don't worry about anything here. Matt and I will be just fine without you for one night. Matt seemed relieved when I told him my plan. Probably thought I'd come back in a better mood. More willing to accept my role as Sandy's personal servant. More willing to shut up about her legs and her movements and all the things I'd been noticing. This is good for you, he said, kissing my forehead. You need this. Take as much time as you need to feel better. I packed an overnight bag and kissed them both goodbye and drove away from my own house. I watched in the rearview mirror as Matt waved from the porch, and Sandy watched from the window with that smile that never reached her eyes. Then I parked 2 streets over where they couldn't see my car and waited. I sat there as the sun went down. I watched the sky turn orange and pink and purple and then finally dark. I watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. I watched the lights in my house go on and then off and then on again in different rooms. I watched shadows move behind the curtains like ghosts of the people who were supposed to love me. At 11:30, the house went completely dark. I waited another hour just to be absolutely sure. Sat there in the darkness going over my plan again and again, making sure I hadn't missed anything, making sure I was ready for whatever I was about to see. Then I got out of my car and walked back to my house. I used the side door that led into the laundry room, the one that didn't squeak because I'd oiled the hinges myself 3 months ago, when Sandy complained that the noise woke her up at night. I slipped off my shoes and walked through the laundry room in my socks. Every step felt like it took forever. My heart was beating so loud I was convinced they'd hear it through the walls. I made it to the hallway when I heard voices, not from the bedrooms, from the kitchen. Voices and laughter. I pressed myself against the wall and crept toward the sound. The kitchen light was on. I could see it spilling into the hallway through the open doorway. Yellow light cutting through the darkness like a knife. I got as close as I dared and peeked around the corner. Sandy was standing at the counter pouring herself a glass of wine. Standing. On her own 2 feet. Without the wheelchair anywhere in sight. Without any assistance at all. Just standing there like it was the most natural thing in the world. Matt sat at the kitchen table with a glass already in front of him. He was smiling and relaxed and leaning back in his chair like he didn't have a care in the world. Like his mother hadn't been pretending to be paralyzed for the past 2 years. Like this was completely normal behavior that happened every night. Like they'd been doing this the entire time. How much longer do you think we have to keep this up? Sandy asked as she brought her wine to the table. She walked perfectly. Smoothly. No limp. No hesitation. No sign of any injury at all. I'm getting sick of sitting in that wheelchair all day pretending I can't move. Not much longer, Matt said. He took a sip of his wine and smiled at his mother. She's close to breaking. I can feel it. The way she looks at me lately. The way she keeps pushing back and asking for help. The way she started noticing things. She's going to crack any day now. Good. Sandy sat down across from him and crossed her legs like it was nothing. Like she hadn't spent 2 years pretending she couldn't move them. I'm getting tired of this act. Do you have any idea how boring it is pretending to be helpless all day? I've watched more daytime television in the past 2 years than I've watched in my entire life combined. If I have to sit through one more cooking show or soap opera, I'm going to actually lose my mind. Matt laughed like she'd said the funniest thing in the world. It'll be worth it in the end. Once she files the papers, I get half of everything. The house, the inheritance money, all of it. We just have to be patient a little while longer. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest, like someone had reached into my body and squeezed all the air out of my lungs. The house, the money, my grandparents' legacy that they'd worked their whole lives to build, the inheritance they'd left me because they loved me. That's what this was about. That's what it had always been about. She should have let me plan the wedding, Sandy said. The fake sweetness was completely gone from her voice now. In its place was something hard and ugly, pure venom dripping from every single word. I told her exactly what I wanted. I gave her a list of reasonable requests. And she looked me in the eye and said it was her and Matt's day, and they were doing it their way. Like I didn't matter. Like I was nobody. I know, Mom. You've told me 100 times. 4 years. 4 years I've been waiting to make her pay for humiliating me like that. In front of everyone. In front of my friends and my family and everyone who mattered. She made me look like a fool and she didn't even care. She smiled while she did it. And now she's going to lose everything she has. Sandy smiled, and it was the ugliest smile I'd ever seen on a human face. Her whole expression transformed into something cruel and satisfied and completely inhuman. The beautiful part is she's going to do it to herself. She's going to file for divorce because she can't take being married to you anymore. Because we've made her life so miserable she'll do anything to escape. And then you get half of everything because she's the one who left. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. And she has no idea what's really going on. None at all. She thinks I actually need her. She thinks she's doing a good thing by taking care of me. Sandy laughed and took a long sip of her wine. She's been bathing me for 2 years, feeding me, changing me like a baby, and the whole time I've been perfectly healthy. The whole time I've been laughing at her behind her back while she destroyed herself taking care of me. I stood in that hallway with my back pressed against the wall. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. I could feel tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. 2 years. 2 years I'd given to that woman. 2 years of bathing her and feeding her and changing her and giving up everything that made me who I was. 2 years of being told I was paranoid and exhausted and imagining things. 2 years of thinking I was losing my mind. And the whole time she'd been faking everything. The whole time Matt had known. The accident was fake. The paralysis was fake. My marriage was fake. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie they'd constructed together to steal everything I had. All of it. Every single moment for the past 2 years. Every sweet smile and kind word and fake apology. All of it was a scheme to break me down until I filed for divorce and handed them half of everything my grandparents had worked their entire lives to give me. I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. I felt my jaw clench so tight my teeth ached. I felt rage pouring through my veins like liquid fire, burning away the exhaustion, burning away the self-doubt, burning away every single moment I'd ever wondered if maybe I was the crazy one. They had no idea I was standing 10 feet away from them, and I was done hiding in the shadows. I stood in that hallway listening to them laugh together, listening to Sandy pour wine on 2 perfectly working legs, listening to Matt talk about my house and my inheritance like it already belonged to him. 2 years. 2 years I gave to that woman. 2 years of my life and my career and my sanity. They thought they were going to break me until I filed for divorce and handed them everything. They had no idea I was standing 10 feet away hearing every word, and I was done hiding. I stepped into the kitchen doorway and let them see me. Sandy saw me first. Her wine glass stopped halfway to her lips, and her whole body went completely rigid. Her face went through about 5 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Surprise, fear, panic, and then a desperate attempt to look confused that didn't fool anyone, including herself. Then Matt turned around in his chair and his face lost every drop of color, like someone had reached inside him and drained all the blood out at once. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. He just sat there staring at me like I was a ghost who'd risen from the dead. Aurora. My name came out of his mouth like a croak, like he was choking on the letters. What are you? I thought you were at your sister's place. I didn't answer him. I was looking at Sandy, at her legs, at the way she was sitting in a regular kitchen chair like a regular person who had never needed a wheelchair a single day in her miserable life. Don't get up on my account, I said. My voice was steady and calm. I barely recognized it as my own. Actually, keep standing, since apparently you've been doing that perfectly fine for 2 years while I destroyed my back lifting your supposedly paralyzed body in and out of that wheelchair. Sandy recovered faster than Matt did. She always was the smarter one of the two. She set down her wine glass carefully on the table and folded her hands in front of her and tried to give me that same sweet smile she'd been using to manipulate me since the day she moved into my house. Sweetheart, she said in that honey voice, I can explain everything. Can you? Can you explain how you've been walking around my house at night while I spent my days bathing you like you were a helpless baby? Can you explain how you've been standing at my kitchen counter drinking my wine while I gave up my entire career to be your full-time nurse? Can you explain any of that, Sandy? Because I would really love to hear what kind of explanation makes any of this okay. It's not what it looks like. I laughed, and the sound was sharp and ugly, and I didn't care at all. It's not what it looks like. I just stood in that hallway for 20 minutes listening to every word you said. I heard you admit the paralysis was fake. I heard you say you've been waiting 4 years to make me pay for not letting you control my wedding. I heard Matt say he's going to take half of everything I own once I crack and file for divorce. I tilted my head and looked at her with all the hatred I'd been suppressing for 4 years. Please, tell me what it actually looks like. I'm absolutely fascinated to hear your explanation. Sandy's sweet expression cracked and fell away. Underneath it, I could finally see the real her, the one my grandmother had warned me about, the one with ice in her veins who smiled while she sharpened the knife. You don't understand what it's like, she started. I understand perfectly. You're a bitter, pathetic old woman who couldn't stand that your son married someone who didn't worship the ground you walked on. So you spent 4 years holding a grudge like it was your most precious possession, and then you came up with this sick, twisted plan to destroy my entire life and steal my inheritance. Matt stood up from the table. His chair scraped against the floor with an ugly sound. He held his hands out in front of him like he was approaching a dangerous animal he was trying to calm down. Aurora, babe, let's just calm down and talk about this rationally. Calm down. You want me to calm down right now? I know this looks really bad. This looks bad. This looks bad, Matt. I laughed again, and it sounded completely unhinged even to my own ears. That's what you have to say to me right now. That's the best excuse you can come up with after I just caught you red-handed. Just let me explain the situation. Explain what exactly? Explain how you've been lying to me for 2 straight years. Explain how you watched me quit my job and destroy my body and lose my mind taking care of your mother who was never actually paralyzed. Explain how you told me I was crazy and paranoid and needed therapy every single time I noticed something was wrong. My voice got louder with every word. I was shaking with rage now and I couldn't stop it. Didn't want to stop it. This anger was the only thing keeping me standing upright. It wasn't supposed to go on this long. Matt said desperately. His voice cracked in the middle like a teenager going through puberty. It was just supposed to be a few months. Long enough for you to get frustrated and overwhelmed. Long enough for you to decide you didn't want to be married to me anymore. But you kept going. You kept taking care of her. You just wouldn't break no matter what we did. So this is my fault now. I'm too resilient. I'm too committed to my marriage. I'm too determined to be a good wife and daughter-in-law. That's the problem here. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying, Matt? Make it make sense for me. Explain to your wife why you and your mother have been running a con on her for 2 years. Explain why you let me think I was losing my mind. Explain why you told me I needed therapy for noticing that something was obviously wrong. Matt opened his mouth and closed it again without saying anything. He had nothing. No excuse good enough to justify any of this. No lie smooth enough to talk his way out of it. For once in his entire life, he was completely speechless. Sandy stood up from the table. She moved smoothly and gracefully like she'd never had a single problem with her legs. Like the wheelchair collecting dust in the corner of my living room was just a prop in the elaborate play she'd been performing for the past 2 years. You want to know why I did this? Sandy said. Her voice was different now. Harder. Colder. No more pretending to be sweet. This was the real Sandy. The one who'd been hiding behind that helpless old woman act the entire time. Because you humiliated me. You looked me in the face and told me I had no say in my own son's wedding. You dismissed every single suggestion I made like I was nobody. You treated me like I was invisible. I didn't let you control my wedding. That's why you destroyed 2 years of my life. You didn't let me have anything. Not the venue, not the flowers, not the guest list, not the music, not a single thing. You took my son from me and then you shut me out of the most important day of his life completely. You made all the decisions without me and you smiled while you did it. It was our wedding, Sandy. Mine and Matt's, not yours. Parents don't get to control their adult children's weddings just because they think they should. He's my son. Sandy's voice rose to something close to a scream. Her face was red and twisted with 4 years of resentment finally boiling over. I raised him completely alone. I sacrificed everything I had for him. His father left when he was 2 years old and walked out on both of us, and I did everything by myself. Every scraped knee, every nightmare, every school project, every football game. I was there for all of it. Me, nobody else. And you came along and made me feel like none of that mattered. Like I was just some obstacle in the way of your perfect life. I stared at her. 4 years of pretending to tolerate me. 2 years of pretending to be paralyzed. Thousands of hours of my time and energy and sanity poured down the drain. All because she didn't get to pick the centerpieces at my wedding reception. You're completely insane, I said quietly. You're actually clinically insane. I'm a mother who was wronged by someone who should have respected me. And I waited 4 years for the perfect opportunity to get what I deserved. What you deserved. You stole 2 years of my life. You made me think I was going crazy. You had me bathing you and feeding you and changing your adult diapers while you laughed about it behind my back with my own husband. And you stole my son from me. So I'd say we're about even now. I turned to look at Matt. He was still standing there with his hands at his sides, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the floor and disappear forever. And you, I said. You went along with every single part of this. You watched me suffer every single day for 2 years and you never said a word. You told me I was paranoid. You told me I needed professional help. You made me think I was the problem in this marriage. I didn't know it would go this far, Matt said weakly. His voice was barely above a whisper. I thought it would be a few months and then you'd file for divorce and I'd get my share of the house and the money and we'd both move on with our lives. I didn't think you'd actually keep going for this long. Your share? Your share of what exactly? The house my grandparents left me. The money they worked their entire lives to save. You think you're entitled to any of that. We're married. What's yours is mine. That's how marriage works legally. So that was the plan all along. Make my life so unbearable that I file for divorce first. Then you get half of everything because I'm the one who left. Because I'm the one who couldn't take it anymore. Very clever. Matt didn't deny any of it. He just stood there staring at the floor like a child who'd been caught stealing from the cookie jar. Whose idea was this whole thing? I demanded. Was it yours, or was it hers? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he gestured toward Sandy without looking at her. It was Mom's idea. The paralysis scheme. The fake accident. She came up with all of it after she found out about your inheritance. Oh, don't you dare. Sandy jabbed her finger at him with fury in her eyes. Don't you dare try to put this all on me. You were more than happy to go along with every part of it. You were the one who said we needed to push harder and move faster. You were the one who kept telling me Aurora was getting close to cracking. You wanted that money just as much as I wanted revenge for what she did to me. You wanted the money too. Don't pretend you're some innocent victim in this. I wanted justice. The money was just a bonus. I watched them turn on each other like rats fighting over scraps. Mother and son, partners in crime, already looking for someone else to blame now that their scheme had fallen apart. 2 years of my life, I said quietly. They both stopped arguing and turned to look at me. 2 years I'm never going to get back. 2 years of thinking I was losing my mind. 2 years of being told I was paranoid and exhausted and imagining things. You both did this to me together. You both watched me fall apart piece by piece, and you didn't care at all. You were counting on it. Matt's expression crumbled slightly. For just a second, he almost looked like the man I'd fallen in love with and married. Almost looked like he might actually feel bad about what he'd done. "I'm sorry," he said. "I really am. I never wanted it to go this far. Things just got out of control. But you didn't stop it either. You watched me suffer every single day, and you didn't say a single word. You could have ended this at any point. You could have told me the truth. You chose not to because you wanted my money more than you ever wanted me. I didn't know how to get out of it once we started. The longer it went on, the harder it got to tell the truth. I was trapped. So you were just going to let it keep going forever until I finally broke completely." He didn't answer. The truth was written all over his face. I looked at both of them standing in my kitchen. My husband, who had never really loved me for a single day of our marriage. His mother, who had been planning my destruction since the moment I said I do. Two people who had smiled at me and hugged me and told me I was family, while they plotted to take everything I had. "Get out of my house," I said. Sandy laughed like I'd told a joke. "Excuse me. Get out of my house. Both of you. Right now. Tonight." "You can't just kick us out," Matt said. "I live here too. This has been my home for years. This is my house. My grandparents left it to me. My name is on the deed. My name is on everything. You don't own a single thing here except your clothes and your collection of lies. We're married. I have legal rights to this property. You have the right to leave before I call the police and report you both for fraud and theft and whatever else I can think of. 2 years of scheming to steal my inheritance has to be worth something in court." That got their attention. Sandy's confident expression wavered for the first time since I'd walked into the room. Matt's face went even paler than it already was. "You can't prove any of this," Sandy said quickly. "It's your word against ours. Nobody's going to believe you. Maybe not, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to spend every single cent of that inheritance my grandparents left me to make sure you both pay for what you've done. Are you willing to bet everything that I won't?" Sandy's jaw tightened. Matt looked like he was about to be sick all over the kitchen floor. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. My voice was steady and calm, and I felt more in control than I had in 2 years. "You're both going to leave this house tonight. You're going to pack whatever you can carry, and you're going to get out and you're never going to come back. And then I'm going to call a lawyer first thing tomorrow morning and figure out how to make sure neither of you ever sees a penny of my grandparents' money." "You can't do this to us," Matt said weakly. "Watch me. Now get out of my house. You have 15 minutes to grab whatever you need. Everything else goes in the trash." Sandy took a step toward me with her hands clenched into fists at her sides. For a second, I thought she might actually try to hit me. "You ungrateful little nothing," she hissed. 10 minutes, I said without flinching. "Every minute you waste arguing with me is a minute less you have to pack your things." They both stared at me. I stared right back without blinking. For 2 years, I'd been the doormat, the caretaker, the devoted wife who put everyone else's needs before her own. I'd made myself smaller and smaller to fit into whatever tiny space they allowed me to occupy. Not anymore. Never again. "Clock's ticking," I said. Matt moved first. He walked past me without making eye contact and went down the hall toward our bedroom. I heard drawers opening and clothes being thrown into bags. The sound of my marriage ending one handful of shirts at a time. Sandy didn't move right away. She stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed over her chest and her face twisted with pure hatred. "You're going to regret this for the rest of your life," she said in a low voice. "I have friends. I have connections. I can make things very difficult for you. You already made things difficult for me. For 2 straight years. And you know what I learned from that experience. I'm a lot harder to break than you ever thought I was." Sandy's lip curled up in disgust. "You were never good enough for my son. And your son was never good enough for me. Now get out of my house before I physically throw you out myself." She held my gaze for a long moment, testing me, trying to find any weakness she could dig her nails into, any crack in my armor she could exploit. She didn't find one. Finally, she turned and walked away down the hallway. Her footsteps were loud against the hardwood floors. No more shuffling. No more pretending she couldn't walk. She moved like what she really was, a perfectly healthy woman who had been playing the most elaborate and cruel game imaginable. I stood in my kitchen and listened to them pack their things. I heard them arguing in low, angry voices. I heard Matt ask Sandy what they were supposed to do now. I heard Sandy snap at him to shut up and focus on getting out before I changed my mind and called the police. 15 minutes later, they walked out the front door with bags in their hands. Matt stopped on the porch and turned back to look at me one last time. His face was a mess of conflicting emotions. Guilt, anger, desperation, self-pity. "Aurora," he said, "I really am sorry. For what it's worth." "It's not worth anything," I told him. "Goodbye, Matt." I closed the door in his face before he could say anything else. In the end, Matt got nothing. Not the house, not the inheritance money, not a single cent of what my grandparents worked their whole lives for.
A child knocked on my door at 2 a.m. saying, "My mommy won't wake up." When I looked at his hands, I saw the blood. The pounding on my door pulled me from sleep so violently I knocked my water glass off the nightstand. It shattered on the hardwood floor of my bedroom, and through the ringing in my ears I heard it again. Desperate, frantic knocking. I grabbed my phone. 2:17 a.m. My heart was already racing when I stumbled to the door in my boxers and t-shirt, squinting through the peephole. A small boy stood in the hallway, maybe 6 years old. His face was streaked with tears and something darker. His pajamas had cartoon dinosaurs on them. When I opened the door, he looked up at me with eyes that had seen something no child should ever see. His voice came out in a whisper. "My mommy won't wake up." That's when I saw his hands. Both palms covered in blood. Fresh blood. Still wet. The boy standing in front of me was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. I asked him where he lived. He pointed down the hall. Apartment 3F, 3 doors down from mine. I'd never seen anyone come or go from that unit. Never heard a sound. The boy's name was Oliver. He told me this while I was grabbing a towel from my bathroom to wrap around his hands. He said his mommy's name was Rebecca. He said she was on the floor and wouldn't answer when he called her name. He said there was so much blood. I told him to stay in my apartment and I'd go check. He grabbed my arm with those bloody hands and begged me not to leave him alone. I brought him with me, held his hand, the less bloody one, as we walked down the hallway. The door to 3F was already open, just a crack, no lights on inside. I pushed it open slowly. The smell hit me first. Copper and something else, something wrong. I felt for the light switch, found it. The apartment was identical to mine in layout, but completely different in every other way. Toys scattered everywhere. Children's books stacked on the coffee table. A small TV playing cartoons with the volume muted. And in the kitchen, visible from the entryway, a woman lay face down on the linoleum floor. Pool of blood spreading from beneath her. I told Oliver to wait in the living room. He didn't listen. He ran past me to his mother and dropped to his knees beside her, started shaking her shoulder and crying. I pulled out my phone and called 911. The operator answered on the second ring. I gave her the address and apartment number. Told her there was a woman unconscious with significant blood loss. She asked if the woman was breathing. I knelt beside Rebecca, careful not to step in the blood, and checked for a pulse. Found one. Weak, but there. Her back was moving slightly. Shallow breaths. I told the operator yes, she was breathing but barely. The operator asked what happened. I said I didn't know. A child had knocked on my door. She asked if there was anyone else in the apartment. I looked around. Saw a closed door down the short hallway. Bedroom. I walked over with Oliver following me like a shadow. Pushed the door open. Empty bedroom. Unmade bed. More toys. No one else there. I told the operator we were alone. She said paramedics were 7 minutes away. She told me not to move Rebecca. Not to touch anything. Just keep her comfortable and monitor her breathing. Oliver was sobbing now. Full body sobs that shook his small frame. I picked him up and carried him back to the living room. Sat him on the couch. Asked him what happened. He said he woke up because he heard his mommy making strange sounds. Choking sounds. He came out of his bedroom and found her on the floor. He tried to wake her, but she wouldn't move. He got scared and ran to find help. Knocked on doors until someone answered. That someone was me. I asked if his daddy was home. He shook his head. No daddy. Just mommy. I asked if anyone else lived here. He said no. Just them. I asked if his mommy was sick. If she'd been sick recently. He said she'd been sad. Very sad. For a long time. But not sick. The operator was still on the line asking questions. I answered what I could. Oliver's age. 6.5. Rebecca's approximate age. Early 30s maybe. Any visible injuries. I couldn't tell with all the blood. The paramedics arrived in 5 minutes. 2 of them. A man and a woman. They came in fast with their equipment and immediately went to work on Rebecca. The woman paramedic had me take Oliver into his bedroom while they assessed his mother. I carried him there and sat with him on his small bed, covered with superhero sheets. He wouldn't let go of my hand. Through the open door, I could hear the paramedics talking in urgent voices. Medical terms I didn't understand. They were moving fast. One of them called for police backup. That's when my stomach dropped. This wasn't just a medical emergency. Something else was happening here. Oliver looked up at me with those huge eyes and asked if his mommy was going to die. I told him the doctors were helping her, that she'd be okay. I was lying. I had no idea if she'd be okay. 2 police officers arrived. A younger woman with her hair in a tight bun, and an older man with gray at his temples. They spoke quietly with the paramedics, then came to Oliver's bedroom. The female officer knelt in front of Oliver and introduced herself as Officer Tess Blackwood. She had a kind face, soft voice. She asked Oliver what happened tonight. He repeated his story. Woke up, heard strange sounds, found mommy on the floor, got scared, found help. Officer Blackwood asked if anyone else had been in the apartment. Oliver said no, just him and mommy. She asked if mommy had any friends who visited. He said Aunt Claire sometimes came, but not tonight. Officer Blackwood looked at me, asked who I was. I explained. Neighbor. Oliver knocked on my door. I called 911. She asked if I'd touched anything in the apartment. I said no, just checked Rebecca's pulse. She nodded. Asked if I'd seen or heard anything unusual tonight before Oliver knocked. I said no, I'd been asleep. The paramedics were loading Rebecca onto a stretcher. I could see them through the doorway. She was intubated now, breathing tube down her throat, IV lines in both arms. They were moving with controlled urgency. The male officer asked Oliver more questions about his daddy. Oliver said his daddy lived far away, didn't visit, only Mommy. The officer asked about other family. Oliver mentioned Aunt Claire again, said she was Mommy's sister, lived in Tacoma. The officer asked if Oliver knew Aunt Claire's phone number. He didn't, but he knew Mommy's phone was on the kitchen counter. Officer Blackwood went to get it. Came back with a phone in an evidence bag. She'd need a warrant to access it. Standard procedure. She asked Oliver if he knew his Mommy's passcode. He said it was his birthday, February 18th. She wrote that down. The paramedics were leaving with Rebecca, moving fast toward the elevators. One of them called back that they were taking her to Harborview Medical Center, trauma unit. Officer Blackwood asked Oliver if he had any other family nearby. Grandparents, friends' parents, anyone who could take care of him tonight. Oliver started crying again, said he wanted his Mommy. Officer Blackwood looked at her partner. They had a quiet conversation in the hallway. I heard fragments. CPS, emergency placement, foster care. My chest tightened. This kid had just found his mother dying on their kitchen floor. Now he was going to be shipped off to some stranger's house in the middle of the night. I spoke up before thinking it through. Told them I could keep Oliver for tonight, just until they found his family. Both officers looked at me like I'd suggested something insane. Officer Blackwood asked if I had any prior relationship with the family. I said no, just neighbors. She said that wasn't how it worked. They needed to follow protocol. But her partner pulled her aside. More quiet conversation. They were looking at Oliver, who was still clinging to my hand, looking at the alternative of dragging a traumatized 6-year-old to a CPS facility at 3 a.m. Officer Blackwood came back, said they'd need to run a background check on me. Full criminal history. I gave them my information. Adrian Cole, social security number, driver's license. They called it in, waited. The background check came back clean. No arrests, no warrants, no red flags. Officer Blackwood made a decision. She said I could keep Oliver for the rest of the night. They'd contact CPS in the morning. But I needed to bring Oliver to the station by 9 a.m., and I couldn't leave the city, and they'd need my full statement about everything I'd seen tonight. I agreed. Signed some papers. The officers took photos of Oliver's hands. The blood was drying now, brown and flaky. They swabbed under his fingernails, collected his pajamas as evidence, gave me a paper bag with his clothes inside, said CPS would need them. They were treating this like a crime scene, which meant they thought someone had hurt Rebecca, on purpose. After the officers left, I cleaned Oliver's hands in my bathroom sink. The water ran pink, then clear. His small hands were shaking under the warm water. I found him clean clothes from my dresser, a t-shirt that hung to his knees, sweatpants with the drawstring pulled tight. He looked tiny in my clothes. I made him hot chocolate from a packet I found in my kitchen. He held the mug with both hands and stared at nothing. I asked if he wanted to sleep. He said he couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his mommy on the floor. I turned on my TV, found a cartoon channel. We sat on my couch together. Oliver eventually leaned against me and fell asleep around 4 a.m. I stayed awake, watched the sky lighten through my window, thought about Rebecca lying in a hospital bed somewhere, thought about what had happened in that apartment, the blood, the way she'd been positioned, face down, like she'd collapsed while standing at the kitchen counter. At 6 a.m., I called Harborview, asked about Rebecca's condition. They wouldn't tell me anything. Patient privacy laws. I wasn't family. I asked if I could at least know if she was alive. The nurse said she couldn't confirm or deny the presence of any patient. I hung up frustrated. Oliver woke up around 7 a.m., looked confused about where he was, then remembered, started crying again. I made him breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast. He picked at it, barely ate. I tried to think of what to say to a traumatized 6-year-old. Came up empty. Around 8 a.m. my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. It was a woman who introduced herself as Diana Shepard from Child Protective Services. She'd been contacted by the Seattle PD about Oliver. She needed to speak with both of us. Could I bring him to the CPS office downtown instead of the police station? I said yes. She gave me the address, told me to be there by 10 a.m. I got Oliver dressed in his own clothes from the evidence bag. The pajamas were gone, but there was a day outfit underneath. Jeans, a striped shirt, sneakers. We took an Uber to the CPS office, a gray building that looked like every other government building. Fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, plastic chairs in the waiting room. Diana Shepard met us there. She was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, wore glasses and had her dark hair in a professional bun. She took us to a small interview room, asked Oliver questions, the same questions everyone else had asked. What happened last night? Who was home? Any other family? Oliver answered robotically, like he'd memorized the responses. Diana asked about school. Oliver said he went to Madison Elementary, 2nd grade, Mrs. Frost's class. Diana wrote everything down. Then she asked me questions. How I knew the family. I explained again. Neighbors. Never met before last night. She asked why I'd offered to keep Oliver overnight. I said because he was terrified and needed stability. She said that was kind, but also outside protocol. Diana explained what would happen next. Oliver would be placed in emergency foster care while CPS investigated the situation. They'd try to locate his father, find other relatives, determine if Rebecca would recover and what her condition was. They'd need to assess whether Oliver was safe to return home, whether there had been any abuse or neglect, whether Rebecca's injuries were self-inflicted or caused by someone else. The police were investigating, treating it as a potential crime scene. Diana said this process could take days or weeks depending on what they found. Oliver started crying when he heard foster care, said he wanted to stay with me. Diana looked uncomfortable, said that wasn't possible. I wasn't a licensed foster parent, didn't have clearance. Oliver grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go. Diana tried to gently separate us. Oliver screamed, full panic attack, hyperventilating. I knelt down and told him it would be okay, that these people would take care of him, that his mommy would get better and they'd be together again soon. More lies. I had no idea if any of that was true. Diana called in another social worker, a man named Gerald who looked like he'd been doing this job too long. He had a gentle way with Oliver, convinced him to let go of my hand, promised Oliver he'd be staying with a nice family who had other kids, that he could bring his favorite toys, that they'd visit his mommy in the hospital soon. Oliver finally relented, walked away with Gerald, looked back at me once before disappearing down the hallway. I felt like I'd just abandoned him. Diana said I could go, but she'd be in touch if they needed anything else. She thanked me for helping Oliver, said not everyone would have gotten involved. I left the building feeling hollowed out, got an Uber back to my apartment, stood in the hallway outside 3F, yellow police tape across the door, crime scene, do not enter. I went back to my apartment, showered, changed clothes, called in sick to work. Couldn't focus on anything except Oliver's face when he'd looked back at me. Around noon, my phone rang. Officer Blackwood. She had questions. Could I come to the station for a formal interview? I said yes. Took another Uber, third one today. I was racking up charges. The police station was busy. Phones ringing, people in handcuffs, chaos. Officer Blackwood met me in the lobby, took me to an interview room. This one had a camera in the corner, recording. She said this was standard procedure. I wasn't a suspect, just a witness. She needed my statement on record. I walked through everything again, the timeline, what I'd seen, what Oliver had said. She asked if I'd noticed anything unusual about Rebecca, any signs of trauma before the blood. I said she was face down. I couldn't see her face or front of her body. Officer Blackwood said that was probably for the best. I asked what that meant. She said she couldn't discuss an ongoing investigation, but off the record. She was surprised I'd kept it together as well as I had. Most civilians didn't handle trauma scenes well. I asked if Rebecca was alive. Officer Blackwood hesitated, then said yes, barely. She was in critical condition, induced coma. The doctors were working to stabilize her. I asked what happened to her. Officer Blackwood said they didn't know yet. They were waiting for toxicology reports, blood analysis. Crime scene investigation was still processing the apartment, but early indicators suggested it wasn't an accident. Someone had hurt her, or she'd hurt herself. Either way, it was bad. I asked about Oliver. She said CPS had him in a safe placement. I asked if they'd found his father. She said they were working on it. Rebecca's phone had been accessed. They'd found contact information for a Claire Brennan in Tacoma, Rebecca's sister. She was on her way to Seattle now, should arrive by evening. I felt some relief at that. Oliver would have family, someone who knew him, loved him. Officer Blackwood asked if Rebecca or Oliver had ever mentioned anything to me. Any problems, threats, suspicious people? I said no, we'd never spoken. I didn't even know they lived there until last night. She asked if I'd heard any arguments, loud noises, anything unusual in the past few weeks. I thought about it, realized I had heard something. About a week ago, late at night, shouting, a man's voice, then silence. I'd assumed it was from a different apartment. Sound carried weird in this building. Officer Blackwood wrote this down, asked if I could identify the voice. I said no, just knew it was male, angry. She asked what time. I said around 11 p.m. maybe. She asked what day. I tried to remember. Last Wednesday, 6 days ago. She made a note, asked if I'd heard anything else, any other disturbances. I said no, that was it. She thanked me, said I could go but I should remain available. They might need to ask more questions. I went home, sat in my apartment, stared at the wall, couldn't stop thinking about Oliver, about Rebecca, about that pool of blood. Around 6 p.m. I decided to go to Harborview, just to see if there was any news. The hospital was massive, trauma center for the entire region. I asked at the front desk about Rebecca's condition. They still wouldn't tell me anything. I wasn't family. I said I was the one who'd found her, the one who'd called 911. The desk clerk said she appreciated that but couldn't help. Privacy laws. I was about to leave when I saw a woman rushing through the lobby. Dark hair, red eyes from crying. She looked like Rebecca. Same facial structure, same slim build. I approached her carefully, asked if she was Claire. She stopped, looked at me with suspicion and grief mixed together, asked who I was. I introduced myself, explained I was the neighbor who'd helped Oliver. Her expression softened. She thanked me, said she'd just arrived from Tacoma, was trying to see her sister. They wouldn't let her up to ICU yet, some kind of police restriction. Claire was shaking. I suggested we sit in the lobby. She agreed. We found chairs near the windows. She said CPS had called her at 5 a.m., told her Rebecca was in critical condition, that Oliver was safe, but in emergency placement. Claire had thrown clothes in a bag and driven straight here. She'd tried calling Rebecca's phone. No answer. The hospital wouldn't tell her anything over the phone. She'd driven 90 minutes in a panic. Now she was here and they still wouldn't let her see her sister. I asked if she knew what happened. She said no, just that Rebecca was injured, unconscious. The police were investigating. She asked what I'd seen. I told her what I could without traumatizing her further. Found Rebecca on the floor. Called 911. Oliver had been scared but physically unharmed. Claire started crying. Said she'd been worried about Rebecca for months, ever since the separation. I asked what separation. Claire said Rebecca had split from Oliver's father 8 months ago. His name was Derek Morse. They'd been together since college, married for 7 years. But Derek had become increasingly controlling, possessive. Rebecca finally got the courage to leave, filed for divorce, got a restraining order, moved into that apartment to start over. Derek was supposed to have supervised visitation with Oliver, but he'd violated the restraining order twice. Showed up at Rebecca's apartment, banged on the door, screamed threats. Both times Rebecca called the police. Both times Derek was arrested but released within hours. The justice system didn't take restraining orders seriously. Not until someone got hurt. Or killed. Claire's words hung in the air. I asked if Derek knew where Rebecca lived now. Claire said yes. He'd found her somehow. Despite her changing her phone number. Despite being careful. He always found her. That's what men like Derek did. They hunted. Claire asked if I'd told police about Derek. I said I hadn't known to mention him. But the police had Rebecca's phone. They'd find his information. They'd question him. Claire said she hoped so, but wasn't optimistic. She'd watched the system fail Rebecca over and over. Judges who gave Derek chance after chance. Cops who treated domestic violence calls like nuisance complaints. A society that protected men like Derek until their partners ended up dead. She said that with such bitterness, I knew she'd been through this before. With Rebecca, watching her sister suffer, unable to help. I asked about Oliver. Had Derek ever hurt him? Claire said not physically, but the psychological damage was there. Oliver had nightmares, anxiety. He'd started therapy 2 months ago, was finally making progress. Now this, whatever this was, it would set him back years, if he ever recovered at all. A nurse approached us, said Claire could see Rebecca now, but only for a few minutes, and she needed to prepare herself. It was bad. Claire stood on shaky legs, asked if I'd wait. She didn't want to be alone after. I said yes. She disappeared down a hallway with the nurse. I sat in the lobby for 45 minutes, watched families come and go, people crying, people praying, people staring at phones, hoping for good news. Claire came back looking worse than before, sat down heavily, didn't speak for a long time. Finally said Rebecca was unrecognizable, swollen, bruised, machines everywhere, breathing tube. The doctors said she had severe internal injuries, damage to vital organs. They'd performed emergency surgery, but the prognosis wasn't good. Even if she survived, there would be permanent damage. Brain, liver, kidneys. Claire's voice cracked. She said it looked like someone had tried to kill her sister, methodically, violently. I asked if the police had said anything. Claire said a detective had been waiting outside Rebecca's room, had asked her questions about Derek, about their relationship, about the restraining order. Claire had told them everything. We sat there together, two strangers bonded by tragedy. Around 8 p.m., Claire said she needed to go see Oliver. CPS had arranged a visit at the foster home. She asked if I wanted to come. I said yes immediately. We took her car, a beat-up sedan that smelled like coffee and stress. The foster home was in Ballard, a nice neighborhood. The house was small but well-maintained. Toys in the yard. A kind-looking woman in her 50s answered the door, introduced herself as Patricia, the foster mother. She led us to the living room where Oliver sat on a couch with 2 other kids. A girl about 10 and a boy maybe 8. Oliver saw Claire and ran to her, threw his arms around her waist, started sobbing. Claire held him and cried too. Patricia ushered the other kids out, gave us privacy. Oliver asked where his mommy was. Claire knelt down, told him mommy was very sick. The doctors were helping her, but she might be sick for a long time. Oliver asked if mommy was going to die. Claire couldn't answer, just held him tighter. Oliver saw me standing by the door, asked why I was there. I said I wanted to make sure he was okay. He said he wanted to go home, wanted his mommy, wanted things to be normal. Claire promised they would be, someday, but right now he needed to be brave, needed to stay with Patricia. She was nice, the other kids were nice, and Claire would visit every day. Oliver asked if he could stay with Claire instead. She said she'd asked, but CPS said no. She lived too far away, worked full-time. Her apartment was too small. The system had rules, stupid rules that didn't account for the fact that Oliver needed family, needed someone who loved him, not strangers. We stayed for an hour, played board games with Oliver, tried to act normal, like his world hadn't just shattered. When it was time to leave, Oliver cried again, begged us not to go. Patricia gently pulled him away, said she'd make him special pancakes for breakfast, anything he wanted. Oliver didn't care about pancakes, he wanted his mother. Claire drove me back to my apartment. We sat in her car outside my building. She thanked me for everything. Said most people would have called 911 and walked away. Wouldn't have gotten involved. I said Oliver needed help. Anyone would have done the same. She said I was wrong. Most people wouldn't have. She gave me her number, asked me to call if I heard anything. About Rebecca, about the investigation, anything. I promised I would. She drove away and I went up to my apartment, walked past the yellow tape on 3F, stood outside my door, realized I'd lived here for 3 years and never once checked if my neighbors needed help. Never introduced myself, never built community, just existed in my small bubble. And now a woman was dying 3 doors down. Her son was traumatized and displaced, and I'd been completely oblivious until a child knocked on my door covered in blood. The next morning, I woke up to my phone ringing. Detective Philip Garza, Seattle PD. He needed to speak with me. Could I come to the station? Again, I went. Same interview room, same camera recording, but this time the energy was different, more intense. Detective Garza was older than Officer Blackwood. Hard face, tired eyes. He'd seen too much. He asked me to go through my statement again. Every detail. What time Oliver knocked, what he said, what I saw in the apartment, how much blood, where it was located, whether I'd touched anything, moved anything. I answered everything. Again. He asked about the male voice I'd heard arguing. When, exactly? What was said? Could I identify any words? I said no. Just angry shouting. Too muffled to make out specifics. Detective Garza asked if I'd seen anyone entering or leaving 3F in the weeks before this happened. I said no. Never paid attention. He asked if I'd seen Derek Morse around the building. Showed me a photo on his phone. A man in his mid-30s, dark hair, square jaw, looked normal, harmless. I'd never seen him. Detective Garza leaned back, said they'd picked Derek up for questioning yesterday evening. He'd been at work when Rebecca was injured, had a solid alibi. Security footage at his workplace showed him there from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. He worked third shift at a warehouse in Tacoma, 35 miles from Rebecca's apartment. No way he could have been there. Derek claimed he hadn't seen Rebecca in weeks, was respecting the restraining order, had no idea she was hurt until police showed up at his job. He'd seemed genuinely shocked, concerned even. But something wasn't right. Derek's demeanor shifted when asked about the divorce, about custody. He'd become defensive, angry, said Rebecca was trying to poison Oliver against him, that she was unstable, had mental health issues, was probably doing this for attention, trying to frame him. Detective Garza said Derek had a history, 2 previous domestic violence complaints from former girlfriends before Rebecca. Charges dropped both times, women too scared to testify, but the pattern was there. I asked if Derek was in custody. Detective Garza said no, couldn't hold him without evidence. His alibi was solid. Unless forensics found something connecting him to the scene, they had to let him go. He'd been released this morning, was already back in Tacoma. Free. I felt anger rising. Asked how that was possible. Rebecca was barely alive, Oliver was traumatized, and Derek was just walking free. Detective Garza said that's how the system worked. Innocent until proven guilty, even when everyone knew better. He said the crime scene unit had found something interesting, though. Couldn't tell me details. But there were elements that didn't add up. Rebecca's injuries suggested a sustained attack, but there were no signs of forced entry, no defensive wounds on her hands, no evidence of a struggle. It was like she'd just stood there and let someone hurt her, or hurt herself. But the injury pattern didn't match self-infliction either. It was a puzzle. And they were missing pieces. Detective Garza asked if I'd be willing to testify if this went to trial. I said yes. Absolutely. He said good, because something was very wrong with this case. And they needed all the help they could get. I left the station feeling frustrated, got an Uber home. My phone rang on the way, Claire. She'd just gotten a call from the hospital. Rebecca had taken a turn for the worse. Multiple organ failure. They were doing everything they could, but it wasn't looking good. Claire was heading back to Harborview now. Asked if I could meet her. I redirected the Uber. Met Claire in the same lobby where we'd sat yesterday. She looked destroyed. Said the doctors had given Rebecca 48 hours. Maybe less. They'd asked about organ donation. About advance directives. Rebecca had never discussed what she'd want. Never imagined she'd be in this position at 32 years old. Claire had to make impossible decisions. I asked about Oliver. Did he know? Claire said no. How do you tell a 6-year-old his mother is dying? We sat in the hospital chapel. Empty, except for us. Claire talked. Said Rebecca had been the strong one growing up. Always confident, independent, had big dreams. Became a nurse. Loved helping people. Met Derek in college. He'd seemed perfect at first. Charming, attentive. But after they got married, things changed. He became jealous, controlling. Wouldn't let her see friends. Monitored her phone. Accused her of cheating constantly. Rebecca kept it hidden for years. Ashamed. Thinking she could fix him. Thinking it was her fault. When Oliver was born, Derek got worse. Saw Oliver as competition for Rebecca's attention. Would fly into rages over nothing. Break things. Punch walls. Never hit Rebecca or Oliver directly. But the threat was always there. Hanging in the air. Rebecca finally left after Derek pushed her down the stairs. She'd been pregnant. Miscarried. That was the breaking point. She filed for divorce. Got the restraining order. Tried to build a new life. And now this. Claire said she blamed herself. Should have helped Rebecca leave sooner. Should have reported Derek. Should have done something. I told her this wasn't her fault. This was on Derek, and on a system that failed to protect Rebecca. Claire said the system was designed to fail women, to give men infinite chances, to prioritize fathers' rights over mothers' safety, to treat domestic violence like a private family matter instead of the crime it was. She said Rebecca had done everything right, documented everything, called police, got a restraining order, left, built a new life, and still ended up here, dying at 32, leaving behind a 6-year-old son. Claire's phone rang. The hospital. She answered. Her face went white. She stood up. Said they needed to come now. Rebecca was crashing. We ran through the hallways, made it to ICU. A team of doctors was surrounding Rebecca's bed. Code blue, alarms blaring. They were doing chest compressions, pumping medication, shocking her heart, trying to bring her back. Claire and I stood outside the room watching through glass, helpless. After 20 minutes, the doctors stopped. One of them walked out, pulled off his mask, said he was sorry. Rebecca was gone. Claire collapsed. I caught her, held her up. She was screaming. No, no, no. Nurses came, tried to comfort her, lead her to a private room. I followed, sat with her while she called family, her mother, Rebecca's friends, everyone who needed to know. Each call was agony, repeating the news, hearing people break down. Claire eventually asked about Oliver. How would they tell him? The hospital social worker said CPS would handle it. They had counselors trained for this. But Claire insisted on being there. He needed family, needed to hear it from someone who loved him. The social worker agreed to arrange it for tomorrow morning at the foster home. Claire needed tonight to process, to figure out what to say, how to tell a 6-year-old that his mother was never coming home. I stayed with Claire at the hospital until midnight, helped with paperwork, arrangements, the practical, horrible details that come with death. When we finally left, I drove her to a hotel near the hospital. She couldn't drive herself, couldn't be alone. I got her checked in, made sure she had food, my number, said I'd come with her tomorrow to tell Oliver. She didn't argue, just nodded. I went home, lay in bed, stared at the ceiling, thought about Rebecca, about Oliver, about Derek walking free, about justice that would never come. I called Detective Garza, left a voicemail, asked what happened now that Rebecca was dead. Was this murder? Would Derek be charged? I needed to know this wouldn't be swept away. Another statistic, another woman dead at the hands of someone who claimed to love her. Detective Garza called back at 7 a.m., said Rebecca's death changed everything. This was now a homicide investigation. Medical examiner was performing an autopsy. Toxicology was rushed. They'd know more in 48 hours. He said Derek had an alibi, but that didn't mean he wasn't involved. Could have hired someone. Could have orchestrated it remotely. They were looking into his finances, phone records, known associates, building a case. But he needed me to understand. This would take time, months maybe. And even then, conviction wasn't guaranteed, especially with Derek's alibi. I asked about Oliver. What happened to him now? Detective Garza said CPS would determine placement, probably with Claire since she was next of kin, unless Derek fought for custody, which he might, out of spite, out of control. The system would have to consider his rights as the father, even if everyone suspected he'd killed Oliver's mother. I picked up Claire at 9 a.m. We drove to the foster home in Ballard. Patricia met us at the door. Her expression said she already knew. CPS had informed her. Oliver was in the living room, playing with toy cars, innocent, unaware. Claire sat beside him. I stood in the doorway. She started gently, said Mommy had been very, very sick. The doctors tried very hard to help her, but sometimes, even doctors can't fix everything. Sometimes people are too sick to get better. Oliver looked confused, asked when he could see Mommy. Claire took his small hands, said Oliver wouldn't be able to see Mommy anymore. Mommy had died. She was gone. Heaven now, with the angels. Oliver stared at her, processed, then started shaking his head. No, Mommy's not dead. She's at the hospital, getting better. Claire tried to hug him. He pushed her away, screamed that she was lying, that Mommy was fine, that he wanted to see her, that everyone was lying. Patricia tried to help. Oliver threw a toy car at the wall. It shattered. He ran to his temporary bedroom, slammed the door. We heard him sobbing through the walls. Claire started to follow. Patricia stopped her, said Oliver needed space. This was normal grief, denial, anger. He'd cycle through it all. They needed to let him process, give him time. Claire was crying, said this was wrong. Oliver shouldn't be here, with strangers. He should be with family. Patricia said she agreed, but there were procedures. CPS would evaluate Claire as a potential guardian, but it could take weeks. Forms, background checks, home visits, and Derek would be notified, would have the right to contest, to fight for custody, Claire said, over her dead body. Derek wasn't getting Oliver, not after what he did. Patricia said carefully that Derek hadn't been charged with anything, was presumed innocent. The court would have to consider his parental rights, unless evidence proved otherwise. We stayed at the foster home for hours. Oliver eventually came out, didn't speak, just sat on the couch, stared at nothing. Claire tried talking to him. He wouldn't respond, wouldn't look at her, shut down completely. Patricia said this was trauma response. Dissociation, normal under the circumstances. He'd need intensive therapy, support, time. Claire asked if she could take Oliver for the day, just to get him out of the house. Patricia said no, not without CPS approval. Claire argued. Patricia stood firm. Rules existed for a reason, even painful rules. We left around 4 p.m. Claire was furious, said this was kidnapping. They were holding Oliver hostage. I tried to calm her down, reminded her that Patricia was just doing her job, following protocol. The real enemy was the system. And Derek. Claire said she was going to fight, hire a lawyer, get emergency custody, do whatever it took. I said I'd help however I could. She dropped me off at my apartment, drove away to start making calls. The next few days were a blur. I went back to work, couldn't focus, kept checking my phone for updates. Claire texted constantly. She'd hired a family lawyer, was filing for emergency guardianship, had submitted to background checks, was preparing her home for Oliver. Detective Garza called on day 4, said the autopsy results were in. Rebecca had been poisoned, massive dose of insulin, enough to send her into hypoglycemic shock, cause organ failure, death. The insulin had been injected, not ingested. Someone had deliberately administered it. Rebecca wasn't diabetic, had no medical need for insulin. Someone had injected her with intent to kill, but there was something else. The injection site was on Rebecca's inner thigh. Hard to reach yourself, not impossible, but unlikely. And there were no other injection marks. No evidence of previous attempts. Just one massive lethal dose, administered precisely, professionally, like someone knew exactly what they were doing. Detective Garza said they'd searched Rebecca's apartment again, found an insulin vial in the back of the bathroom cabinet, behind cleaning supplies, wrapped in a plastic bag. Fingerprints on the vial belonged to Rebecca. Only Rebecca. No one else. They'd checked. Derek's prints weren't there. No other person's prints. Just hers. Which meant either Rebecca had injected herself, suicide, or someone had been incredibly careful, wore gloves, made it look like suicide. Detective Garza said Rebecca's medical records showed no history of mental illness, no suicidal ideation, no previous attempts. She'd been in therapy after leaving Derek, working through trauma, but her therapist said she was making progress, planning for the future, excited about Oliver starting 2nd grade. This wasn't consistent with someone planning to die, but they had to consider all possibilities. The investigation was ongoing. They were looking into where the insulin came from, who had access. But without physical evidence connecting Derek or anyone else, this might be ruled as suicide. Case closed. I asked about Oliver. Would he be told? Detective Garza said eventually, when he was older. For now, CPS was treating this as suspicious death pending investigation. Derek had filed for custody, was claiming Rebecca's instability. Her suicide proved she'd been unfit, dangerous. He was Oliver's father, had rights. The court would decide. Claire was fighting back, but the system favored biological parents, even terrible ones. I felt sick, asked what I could do. Detective Garza said nothing unless I remembered something new, some detail I'd forgotten. I said I'd think about it, ended the call, sat in my apartment, replayed that night over and over. Oliver knocking, the blood on his hands, Rebecca on the floor, the pool spreading, the smell. Something nagged at me, something wrong. I couldn't place it. I called Claire, told her about the autopsy, the insulin, the fingerprints. She said it was impossible. Rebecca would never kill herself, would never leave Oliver. Someone did this, someone smart, someone careful, someone who knew exactly how to make murder look like suicide, someone like Derek. Claire said Derek was a pharmaceutical sales rep, had been for years, had access to medical supplies, insulin, syringes, knew dosages, knew how to inject, knew how to kill, but he had an alibi, was at work, miles away. Claire said he must have hired someone, paid someone. There was no other explanation. I asked if she'd told this to the police. She said yes, they were investigating, but without proof, it was speculation. Derek's finances showed no unusual transactions, no payments to suspicious individuals. His phone records were clean. If he'd hired someone, he'd been careful, covered his tracks, left no trail. Claire said her lawyer was filing emergency motions, requesting supervised visitation only for Derek, citing the restraining order history, the suspicious death, but the judge would probably allow some contact. Derek was the father, had rights. Claire's voice broke. She said Oliver was getting worse, wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, barely spoke. The foster home was trying, but he needed family, needed her. The system was moving too slowly, forms and procedures while a 6-year-old suffered. 2 weeks passed. The court granted Claire supervised visitation with Oliver, once a week, 3 hours, at the CPS office, under observation. It was insulting, but better than nothing. Derek was granted the same. Claire attended every visit, brought Oliver's favorite foods, toys from home, photos of Rebecca, tried to maintain connection, keep memories alive. Derek attended twice. Both times brought expensive gifts, video games, remote control cars, things a 6-year-old would love. But Oliver barely reacted, didn't want Derek's gifts, didn't want Derek, would sit in the corner during visits, refused to speak. Derek would get frustrated, accuse CPS of turning Oliver against him, claim parental alienation, say Rebecca had poisoned Oliver's mind. Claire wanted to scream, to tell Derek exactly what she thought. But her lawyer advised silence. Let Derek show his true colors. Let the system see who he really was. The custody hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after Rebecca's death. Claire's lawyer prepared everything. Character witnesses, Rebecca's documented history of abuse, the restraining orders, police reports, Derek's previous complaints from ex-girlfriends, therapy records showing Oliver's trauma response to Derek. But Derek had his own lawyer, expensive. Good. They prepared too. Painted Rebecca as unstable, suicidal, unfit. Said she'd kept Oliver from his father out of spite, that Derek had been trying to rebuild their relationship, that he loved his son, wanted to provide stability, said the suspicious death was tragic, but not Derek's fault. That without evidence of foul play, the court should focus on Oliver's best interests, which meant being with his father, his biological parent, not with an aunt who lived an hour away, worked full-time, had no children of her own. The hearing lasted all day. Testimonies, evidence, arguments. I attended as a witness, described that night, what I'd seen, what Oliver had said. Derek's lawyer asked if I'd seen Derek at the scene. I said no. Asked if I had any evidence Derek was involved. I said no, just suspicions. Suspicions weren't facts. The judge listened to everything, asked questions, reviewed documents. At the end of the day, she said she needed time to deliberate, would issue a ruling within a week. Claire left the courthouse devastated, said she could feel it going the wrong way. The judge was leaning toward Derek, toward biological rights, toward keeping father and son together, despite everything, despite common sense, despite the dead mother whose killer was still free. I tried to reassure her, said we didn't know what the judge would decide, had to wait. Hope. Claire said hope had died with Rebecca. Now there was only fear. Fear for Oliver. Fear of what Derek would do once he had full custody. No supervision, no oversight, just a traumatized child and the man who'd probably murdered his mother. The judge's ruling came 6 days later. Joint custody. Claire would have Oliver during the school year. Derek would have summers and alternating holidays. Supervised visitation for Derek for 6 months, then reassess. It was a compromise. Solomon splitting the baby. Neither side happy, but the court's decision was final, unless new evidence emerged, unless something changed. Claire called me crying, said at least Oliver would be with her most of the time, away from Derek. But summers terrified her. 3 months alone with Derek. Anything could happen. I asked about the police investigation. Any updates? Claire said Detective Garza had called yesterday. The case was going cold. No new evidence. No witnesses. No confession. They'd interviewed Derek extensively. He'd never slipped. Never revealed anything. Maintained his innocence, his grief, his shock at Rebecca's death. Without proof, they couldn't charge him. Couldn't arrest him. Couldn't stop him from getting custody. The case would remain open, but inactive, unless something broke, some new lead, some revelation, but those rarely came. Claire picked up Oliver from foster care 3 days later, brought him to her apartment in Tacoma, enrolled him in a new school, started therapy twice a week, tried to build a life for him, for both of them. She quit her job to be home more, found remote work, did everything she could to help Oliver heal, but the damage was deep. Oliver had nightmares, panic attacks, separation anxiety, refused to sleep alone, would wake up screaming for his mother. Claire would hold him until he cried himself back to sleep, then lie awake, wondering how to help a child process this kind of trauma, how to explain that his mother was gone, that the man who'd probably killed her was his father, that the world was unfair and cruel, and justice was a myth we told ourselves to feel safe. 6 months passed. Oliver was doing better, slowly. His therapist said he was processing, beginning to accept. Still had a long way to go, but progress was real. Claire called me occasionally, updated me, said Derek's supervised visits had ended. Judge granted unsupervised, 2 weekends a month. Claire had to hand Oliver over, watch Derek drive away with her nephew, not know if he'd come back, live with that terror every time. So far, Derek had been model father, picked up and dropped off on time, called Oliver between visits, sent cards, acted like nothing had ever happened, like Rebecca had never existed, like the restraining orders and arrests and suspicious death were all misunderstandings. Claire said Oliver came back from Derek's quiet, withdrawn, would take days to open up again, to feel safe. Then it was time to go back. The cycle repeated, breaking him a little more each time. I went on with my life, work, apartment, routine, but couldn't forget. Would pass 3F in the hallway. New tenant moved in last month. Young couple. No idea what happened there. Probably better that way. I'd think about Rebecca sometimes, about Oliver, about the blood on his hands, about how close he'd come to losing both parents in one night, how he'd still might. Summer was approaching. Derek would have Oliver for 3 months, unsupervised, unmonitored. Claire was terrified. Her lawyer filed motions to limit the summer custody. Judge denied. Court order was clear. Derek had rights. The calendar marched forward. June 1st. Summer custody began. Claire dropped Oliver off at Derek's apartment, cried the whole drive home, called me from her car, said she didn't know if she'd ever see Oliver alive again. I told her Derek wouldn't hurt his own son. She said Derek had probably killed Oliver's mother. Why would Oliver be safe? 2 weeks into summer, Claire stopped hearing from Oliver. Derek wasn't answering calls, wasn't responding to texts, was within his rights to limit contact during his custody time, but Claire was panicking. She drove to Derek's apartment in Tacoma, knocked, no answer, looked through windows, no one home. She called Derek's work. They said he'd taken vacation time, 3 weeks, didn't say where he was going. Claire called police, reported Oliver missing. They said he wasn't missing, was with his father, legal custody. Unless there was evidence of danger, they couldn't intervene. Claire called her lawyer. Lawyer filed emergency motions. Judge wouldn't hear it for a week. Scheduled court time. Couldn't bump other cases. Claire called me sobbing. Said Oliver was gone. Derek had taken him. Disappeared. She'd been right to be afraid. I called Detective Garza. Asked if he could do anything. He said his hands were tied. Derek hadn't broken any laws. Was allowed to travel with his son. Unless Claire had proof of danger, police couldn't act. 3 days later, Claire got a call. Unknown number. She answered. It was Oliver. Crying. Whispering. Said Daddy was acting scary. They were at a cabin somewhere. No other people. Just woods. Derek kept talking about Mommy. About how she'd tried to keep them apart. How she'd deserved what happened. How they'd be together now. Just the two of them. Forever. Oliver said he was scared. Wanted to come home. The line went dead. Claire tried calling back. Number blocked. She called police immediately. Played them the recording. They took it seriously now. Put out alerts. Tracked the phone number. Burner phone. Purchased with cash. No way to trace. But the call had pinged off a cell tower in North Cascades National Park. Remote area. Hundreds of cabins. Forest Service started searching. Police helicopters. Ground teams. Looking for Derek's car. A gray sedan. Plates registered to Derek Morse. Claire and I drove up there. Joined the search. Spent 3 days hiking trails. Checking cabins. Finding nothing. On day 4, a ranger found Derek's car. Abandoned at a trailhead. Empty. No sign of Derek or Oliver. K9 units tracked their scent into the forest. Deep. Miles from any road. They were on foot. Running. Or hiding. Police called it a manhunt now. Amber Alert issued. Derek's photo everywhere. Described as armed and dangerous. Flight risk. Possible parental abduction. Media picked it up. National news. The story had everything. Dead mother. Suspicious circumstances. Custody battle. Missing child. Claire did interviews. Begged Derek to bring Oliver back. Said he'd get help. Treatment. Just please don't hurt Oliver. Detective Garza led the investigation. Said they'd found evidence in Derek's apartment. A journal. Detailed plans. Derek had been planning this for months. Since losing primary custody. Wrote about taking Oliver somewhere they'd never be found. Starting over. Becoming new people. The journal also contained confessions. About Rebecca. About the insulin. About making it look like suicide. He'd done it. Killed her. Admitted it in writing. But only to himself. Probably never meant for anyone to read it. But now police had it. Had proof. Had a murder case. If they found Derek alive. 6 days into the search, a hiker called 911. Found a body. Adult male. Derek's description. Remote area. Near a cliff. Police recovered the body. Confirmed identity. Derek Morse. Dead. Appeared to be a fall. Trauma consistent with hitting rocks. But no Oliver. Search intensified. Where was he? Had Derek hurt him before falling? Had Oliver witnessed it? Was he alive out there, scared, alone, or worse? Claire was beside herself, screaming. Couldn't breathe. I stayed with her. Held her up. Police brought in more teams. Searched a 5-mile radius from Derek's body. Used thermal imaging. Drones. Dogs. Nothing. Days passed. Hope faded. They were searching for a body now. No child could survive this long in the wilderness. No food, no water, no shelter. If Derek had hurt him, if he'd fallen somewhere, if animals had... Claire couldn't finish the thoughts. Just prayed. Begged. Bargained with God. Universe. Anyone listening. On day 9, a search dog alerted near a stream. 2 miles from Derek's body. Different direction. Police found a small cave. Really just an overhang. Inside was Oliver. Alive. Barely. Dehydrated. Hypothermic. Unconscious. But alive. They rushed him to hospital. Called Claire. She met them there. Oliver was in ICU. Critical condition. But stable. Doctors said another day and he'd have died. He'd been drinking stream water. Eating berries. Trying to survive. Waiting for rescue. When he woke up, he told police what happened. Derek had brought him to the cabin. Kept him there. Talked about Mommy. About staying together forever. Oliver got scared. Tried to call Aunt Claire. Derek caught him. Got angry. Said they had to leave. They started hiking. Derek was talking crazy. About Mommy deserving it. About how he'd made it look perfect. Nobody would ever know. They walked for hours. Oliver was tired. Scared. Then, Derek slipped, near the cliff edge, fell, screamed. Oliver watched him disappear, heard the impact far below. Oliver ran, didn't know where, just away, found the cave, hid, waited, thought rescue would come. Days passed. He got weaker, hungrier, thought he'd die like Daddy, like Mommy, alone, but kept hoping, kept waiting, until the dog found him. Claire held Oliver in that hospital bed and sobbed. Relief, grief, rage, everything at once. Oliver was safe, alive, but scarred forever. Had watched his father confess to killing his mother, then watched him die. 6 years old, and he'd experienced more trauma than most people face in a lifetime. The therapists said recovery was possible, but it would take years, maybe decades. Oliver would need intensive treatment, support, love. Claire said she'd give him everything, whatever he needed, for as long as he needed it. She'd make sure he knew he was wanted, loved, safe, that what happened wasn't his fault, that he'd survived, that he was brave. Detective Garza closed Rebecca's case, ruled homicide. Derek Morse identified as perpetrator. Case cleared by death of suspect. Justice served, sort of. Derek was dead, would never stand trial, never face Rebecca's family, never be held accountable in any real way. But at least everyone knew the truth. Rebecca hadn't killed herself, had been murdered by the man she'd tried to escape, the man the system had protected, the man who'd gotten chance after chance until he'd killed. Claire filed wrongful death suits against Derek's estate, against the court system that had ignored Rebecca's pleas, against the police who'd treated restraining orders like suggestions. Some settled, some were dismissed. Money didn't matter, wouldn't bring Rebecca back, but maybe it would change policies, protect the next woman, save the next life. Claire established a foundation in Rebecca's name, advocated for domestic violence victims, pushed for better laws, stricter enforcement, real consequences for abusers. She turned her rage into purpose, her grief into action. Oliver moved in with Claire permanently, started 3rd grade in Tacoma, went to therapy 3 times a week, made slow, steady progress, had good days and bad days, would still wake up screaming sometimes, would still check locks obsessively, would still flinch at loud noises, but he smiled sometimes too, played with other kids, talked about Mommy without crying every time, was learning to live with the weight he'd carry forever. Claire called me occasionally, updated me, said Oliver asked about me sometimes. The neighbor who'd helped him that night, who'd stayed when he was scared. I visited a few times, brought Oliver books, played board games, tried to be another stable adult in his orbit, another person who showed up, who cared. It wasn't much, but it was something. 2 years after that night, I moved to a different apartment building. Couldn't walk past 3F anymore without seeing blood, without hearing Oliver's small voice, without remembering how close evil had been to my door. But I kept Claire's number, kept the promise to show up for Oliver's birthdays and holidays, kept fighting alongside her for the laws that might save the next Rebecca, knowing we'd never save enough, but refusing to stop trying, because that night taught me that being a good person isn't about being a hero. It's about answering the door when a child knocks covered in blood, and never closing it again. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.
When did your parents' no dating rule completely backfire? My parents' rule was simple: no dating until marriage. Not a typo. They meant I couldn't date anyone unless we were already engaged to be married. Traditional courtship only, supervised visits, the whole thing straight out of a 1950s handbook they probably found in my grandmother's attic. I followed it. Every single rule. Through high school, I watched my friends sneak out to movies and hold hands in hallways while I went straight home after volleyball practice. Through college, I turned down invitations to parties and coffee dates, explaining apologetically that my family had different values. Some people thought I was lying. Others thought I was in a cult. I just wanted my parents to be proud of me. By 24, I started wondering if I'd made a huge mistake. But then Mom came into my bedroom one day morning with this excited expression on her face. She told me she had someone she wanted me to meet. I started to protest, but Mom cut me off, explaining that his name was Timothy, from the Brianna family, the ones from Dad's church network. She went on about what wonderful people they were, how traditional their values were, and how Timothy had specifically asked about meeting me. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded to know why a complete stranger was asking about me, but I was tired of being the only 24-year-old woman in my social circle who'd never even held hands with someone. I agreed to meet him. We met that Sunday after service. Timothy was handsome in a clean-cut, almost too perfect way. Dark hair, nice smile, good posture. He shook my hand formally and called my father, Sir. He told me it was wonderful to meet me, that my parents had told him so much about me. We sat in my parents' living room while Mom brought out coffee and cookies. Dad positioned himself in the armchair like a referee at a tennis match, watching our conversation bounce back and forth. When I asked what he did for work, Timothy explained he worked in finance, nothing too exciting. But then he said he'd been praying for a wife who shared his values, someone who understood the importance of family and faith. The word wife should have sent up red flags. We'd known each other for approximately 11 minutes, but my parents were beaming. Over the next 3 months, Timothy and I saw each other twice a week, always at my parents' house or his parents' house, always supervised. He wanted 4 children, I wanted 3. I told my best friend Melanie on the phone one night that I thought he was the one. "You've never even been alone with him," she said. "Don't you think you should actually date him first?" I reminded her that wasn't how my family did things. Your family's way is insane. But when Timothy proposed after our 12th visit, down on one knee in my parents' living room with both sets of parents watching, I said yes. His mother hugged me and called me her daughter. We set the wedding date for 4 months away. Then I started noticing small things. The way Timothy always arrived exactly when he said he would, never early. The way he never suggested we bend the rules even slightly. Never asked to take a walk alone or have a real conversation without parents hovering. Mom dismissed my concerns when I mentioned it, insisting he was just respectful, that this was what I wanted in a husband. Timothy talked about his childhood a lot, but the details were always vague. I grew up in the Midwest rather than naming a specific city. My parents moved around for work instead of explaining what his father did. I mentioned it to Dad one evening while washing dishes, pointing out how Timothy never really talked about his past in detail, never said where exactly he'd grown up or what city. When he asked what I meant, I pressed him about the specifics. Where had Timothy grown up? What city exactly? Dad said quickly that Timothy had lived in different places, that his father had traveled for work. He set down the plate when I asked what kind of work. "Kimberly, why are you asking all these questions? Timothy is a good man from a good family. That's what matters." I waited until my parents went to bed, then opened my laptop. I searched for Timothy's full name plus finance companies in our city. Nothing. I tried social media. His accounts were all private, except one profile with no photos, created 6 months ago. I called the church office the next morning, explaining I was marrying Timothy from the Brianna family network and wanted to confirm some details about his membership records for our wedding program. The secretary was quiet for a moment. "The Brianna family doesn't have anyone named Timothy in their family, honey." I drove to my parents' house. Dad was alone in the garage. "Who is Timothy really?" I asked. Dad's face went white. He started to say my name, but I cut him off. "Who is he?" Dad sat down heavily on his workbench. "He's your half-brother." "My what?" "I had an affair 26 years ago, before you were born. Timothy's mother and I. It was a mistake. She moved away. I sent money. When Timothy reached out last year wanting to connect, I panicked. Your mother doesn't know. I thought if I could just..." He looked up at me with desperate eyes. "I thought if I could bring him into the family properly, through marriage to you, I could legitimize him without admitting the truth. You weren't supposed to find out. You were just supposed to follow the rules." I left without saying another word. I called Timothy, or whoever he actually was, and told him I knew everything. He started crying, saying he was sorry, that Dad had manipulated him too, promising him a place in the family if he went along with this insane plan. Update. Okay, so I know you're all waiting for this update, and honestly, I've been sitting here for the past 3 days trying to figure out how to even start explaining what happened after I posted. Because what I thought was the worst thing imaginable, turns out that was just the beginning of this absolute nightmare my life has become. So when I left Dad standing in that garage looking like his entire world was crumbling, I drove straight to Melanie's apartment. I didn't even remember the drive there. 1 minute I was pulling out of my parents' driveway, and the next I was sitting in her parking lot with my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn off the engine. Melanie took one look at my face when she opened the door and pulled me inside without saying anything. I told her everything. The whole twisted story about Dad's affair and Timothy being my half-brother and this absolutely insane plan to marry us off to legitimize him. Melanie just stared at me for a solid minute before she said, "What the actual fuck is wrong with your father?" Not even a question, just a statement. We were sitting on her couch and she kept getting up and pacing around her living room like she couldn't process what I was telling her. She asked if Mom knew, and when I said no, she stopped pacing and looked at me like I'd grown a second head. That's when my phone started going crazy. Group texts from the wedding planning chat Mom had created with me, her, and Timothy's supposed mother, who I now realized was probably his actual mother. Messages about cake tastings and flower arrangements and photographer schedules. Every notification made me want to throw my phone across the room. Melanie grabbed it from my hands and turned it face down on her coffee table. She said I needed to figure out what I was going to do, and I needed to do it fast because this wasn't going away. I knew I had to talk to Timothy again. Not over the phone this time where he could hide behind tears and excuses. I needed to see his face and figure out if he was really just another victim in Dad's sick plan, or if he'd been in on this the whole time. So I texted him and told him to meet me Thursday afternoon at the food court in Mall. Public place, lots of people around. Nowhere for either of us to make a scene. I was sitting at one of those tables near the Panda Express, and when he walked up, I didn't stand or hug him or do any of the things I would have done a week ago when I thought he was my fiancé. I just looked at him and waited. He sat down and immediately started talking about how sorry he was, how he never meant for any of this to happen, how Dad had promised him a family and a place to belong. I cut him off. I told him to start from the beginning and tell me everything. When did he find out Dad was his father? When did this plan start? And how the hell did he think marrying his own sister was going to work out? Timothy looked around like he was checking to see if anyone was listening. Then he leaned forward and started talking in this low voice. He said he'd known about Dad his whole life. His mother had told him when he was 12 that his father was married to someone else and had another family. She'd shown him pictures of Dad that she'd kept, told him his name, told him where he lived. Timothy grew up in Wisconsin watching from a distance as Dad built this perfect traditional family with Mom and me. I asked why he didn't just introduce himself like a normal person. Why this elaborate charade? Timothy said Dad panicked when he first contacted him. Dad sent him money at first, told him to stay away, said his life would be ruined if anyone found out about the affair. But Timothy kept pushing. He said he deserved to know his father, deserved to be part of the family. So Dad came up with this plan. According to Timothy, Dad had convinced him that if he could join the family the right way through marriage, it would be easier for everyone to accept. That once we were married and established, Dad would eventually reveal the truth, and everyone would be so used to Timothy being around that they'd just accept it. Timothy actually sat there and tried to tell me this made sense to him at the time. He said he was desperate for a father and a family, and he didn't think it through. I asked him when exactly he figured out I was his sister. Like, at what point in this insane plan did he realize he was being asked to marry his own half-sibling? Timothy looked down at his hands and admitted Dad had told him from the very beginning, before we even met. He'd known the entire time. I lost it. Right there in the middle of the food court, I lost it. I told him he was just as sick as Dad, that I didn't care how desperate he was for family, what kind of person agrees to marry their own sister. People were starting to stare, but I didn't care. Timothy tried to reach across the table like he was going to take my hand, and I yanked it back so fast I knocked over my cup of water. He started saying that he thought maybe we could just go through with the ceremony and then get it annulled quietly later, that Dad had convinced him this was the only way. That's when I realized Timothy wasn't some innocent victim. He was a grown man who had made a choice to go along with this because it benefited him. He wanted access to Dad, to the family, to whatever inheritance or legitimacy came with being acknowledged, and he was willing to destroy my life to get it. I stood up and told him to stay away from me, stay away from my family, and if he contacted me again, I'd tell everyone in Dad's church network exactly what he tried to do. I left him sitting there and walked out to my car. I was shaking so hard I had to sit in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could drive. That's when Mom called. Perfect timing, right? She wanted to know where I was because Dad had been acting strange, and she needed help figuring out what was wrong with him. The guilt in her voice when she said she was worried about him made me want to scream. I drove to my parents' house because this had gone on long enough. Mom was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked in. Dad was in the living room, and when he saw me, his face went gray. I looked at Mom and told her we needed to talk. All three of us. Right now. Mom set down her cutting board and looked between me and Dad with this confused expression. She asked what was going on and why I sounded so serious. Dad started to say it was nothing, that we could talk about it later, but I spoke over him. I told Mom that Dad had something he needed to tell her, something he should have told her 26 years ago. The look on Dad's face was like I'd physically hit him. He kept shaking his head and saying we didn't need to do this now, that we should think about it first. Mom's expression changed from confused to suspicious, and she asked what he was talking about. I looked right at Dad and said, "Go ahead. Tell her about Timothy. Tell her who he really is." And that's when Dad did something I never expected. He turned to Mom and denied everything. He said I'd misunderstood, that Timothy was exactly who they'd said he was, from the Brianna family network. He looked at me like I was crazy and asked Mom if she'd noticed me acting strange lately, if maybe the wedding stress was getting to me. Mom's eyes were going back and forth between us, and she asked me what I was talking about. I pulled out my phone and played the voicemail Timothy had left me after our first confrontation. The one where he was crying and apologizing and saying Dad had manipulated him, where he said he was sorry for going along with the plan to marry his half-sister. I watched Mom's face as she listened to Timothy's voice saying the words half-sister and Dad's plan. Mom grabbed the counter. She asked Dad if this was true. Dad tried to say the recording was taken out of context, that Timothy was confused, but Mom's voice got very quiet and very cold. She told him to stop lying to her. She asked him directly if he'd had an affair and if Timothy was his son. The silence in that kitchen felt like it lasted forever. Finally, Dad sat down at the table and admitted it. He told Mom about the affair 26 years ago, before I was born. He said it was a mistake, that the woman had moved away, that he'd sent money all these years. Mom asked why Timothy was here now, and Dad tried to explain his plan about bringing him into the family through marriage to me. Mom's reaction was not what I expected. She didn't cry or scream or throw things. She just looked at Dad with this expression of complete disgust and told him to get out of her house. Dad started to argue, and she repeated herself louder. She told him to pack a bag and leave and not come back until she said he could. She said she needed time to think, and she couldn't do that with him in the same house. Dad looked at me like this was my fault, like I'd betrayed him by telling Mom. I stared right back at him and said he'd betrayed all of us first. He left the kitchen and went upstairs. We heard him moving around in the bedroom, opening drawers and closet doors. Mom sat down at the table and put her head in her hands. She asked me how long I'd known. I told her I'd just found out, that I'd called the church office to confirm some details, and they'd never heard of the Brianna family. That's when I'd confronted Dad. Mom said she'd been married to him for 27 years and never suspected anything. She asked if I'd met Timothy in person after finding out the truth, and I told her about the mall conversation. Mom wanted to know if Timothy had known from the beginning. When I told her yes, that Dad had told him before we ever met, she stood up and walked to the sink. She said something that surprised me. She said she'd always thought there was something off about Timothy, something too practiced about the way he interacted with our family. She'd dismissed it as him being nervous, but now it made sense. Dad came back downstairs with a duffel bag. He tried one more time to explain himself, but Mom held up her hand. She told him she didn't want to hear it right now, that she needed space to process what he'd done. She said she'd contact him when she was ready to talk, and until then he should stay with his brother or find a hotel. Dad looked at me again, and I refused to feel guilty. After he left, Mom and I sat in the living room for hours. She wanted every detail of my interactions with Timothy, every red flag I'd noticed, everything Dad had said in the garage when I confronted him. I told her all of it. She asked about the wedding, and I said obviously it was canceled. Mom nodded and said she'd start making calls in the morning. But here's where it gets even more complicated, because apparently this story wasn't twisted enough already. Mom's phone started ringing around 9 that night. It was Francis, Dad's brother. He said Dad had just shown up at his house and was telling him some story about me having a breakdown and calling off the wedding over nothing. Francis wanted to know what was really going on. Mom told him everything. I heard Francis go silent on the other end of the phone, and then he started yelling, loud enough that I could hear him from across the room, asking what the hell was wrong with Dad. Mom had to hold the phone away from her ear. Francis said he was coming over and hung up. He showed up 30 minutes later. Francis is not a small man, and he looked ready to drive straight back to his house and physically remove Dad from his guest room. He kept pacing around the living room, asking how Dad could be so stupid and selfish. He looked at me and apologized. Said he had no idea any of this was happening, that Dad had never mentioned having another son. That's when my phone buzzed with a message. It was Timothy's actual mother. The woman I'd thought was part of some church family network. She said she heard about what happened and wanted to talk to me. She wanted to explain her side of things. And that's where I'm at right now. Mom is upstairs figuring out how to cancel a wedding that's supposed to happen in less than 4 months. Francis is in the kitchen calling other family members to do damage control before Dad tries to spin this as me being unstable. Timothy's mother apparently wants to have a conversation with me about her affair with my father and her role in this nightmare. I have no idea what happens next. All I know is that the man I was supposed to marry in 4 months is my half-brother. My father is a manipulative liar who was willing to let us commit what would basically be incest to cover up his affair, and my entire life has imploded in less than a week. So, yeah. If anyone has advice on how to navigate this absolute disaster, I'm all ears. Last update. Alright everyone, I'm back with what I hope is the last update to this absolute disaster of a situation. To everyone who's been following along and leaving supportive comments, thank you. Seriously. I've been reading every single one, and they've honestly kept me sane through the past 2 weeks of my life completely falling apart. So when I left off, Timothy's mother had texted me wanting to talk. I ignored it for 2 days because honestly I didn't know if I could handle another conversation with another person who'd been part of this nightmare. But she kept texting. Not harassing me or anything, just these messages saying she understood if I never wanted to speak to her, but she had things she needed to tell me about Dad and about Timothy that I deserved to know. Finally, on Saturday morning, I was at Target picking up stuff for Mom because she basically hadn't left the house since Dad moved out. And I was standing in the cleaning supplies aisle staring at trash bags when my phone buzzed again. Another text from Timothy's mother, whose name I now knew was Angelica. She said she was in town and would I please meet her somewhere public, just for 30 minutes. I texted back fine and told her to meet me at Riverside Park in an hour. The one with the big walking trail and the picnic pavilions. I figured if she tried anything crazy, at least there'd be joggers and dog walkers around. I finished shopping, dropped everything off at Mom's, and drove to the park. Angelica was already there sitting at one of the picnic tables near the playground. I recognized her immediately from the few family dinners we'd had together back when I thought she was just Timothy's nice traditional mother. She looked older than I remembered, tired. She stood up when she saw me walking over but didn't try to hug me or anything, just gestured to the bench across from her. She started by apologizing. Not the fake kind of apology where someone's trying to make themselves feel better, but this raw, genuine one where she said she was sorry for every single thing that had happened, that she'd made terrible choices 26 years ago and worse choices in the past year. I sat down and told her I didn't come here for apologies, I came here for answers. I wanted to know how she could have let her son agree to marry his own half-sister. Angelica looked down at her hands and said she didn't know that was the plan until it was already happening. When Timothy had first told her he'd made contact with Dad and they were building a relationship, she thought maybe her son would finally get the father figure he'd always wanted. She said she'd been young and stupid when she had the affair with Dad, that he'd told her he was going to leave his wife, but then I was born, and he chose to stay. She'd raised Timothy alone and always felt guilty that he didn't have a father. I asked her point blank when she found out about the marriage plan. Angelica said Timothy told her Dad had this idea about bringing him into the family through marriage, that it would legitimize everything. She'd immediately told him no, that it was insane and wrong and he needed to walk away. But Timothy had been so desperate for Dad's approval that he convinced himself it would work out. According to Angelica, Timothy had told her that Dad promised the marriage would just be a formality, that they'd get it annulled quietly after a year or so once everyone was used to him being around. She said she'd threatened to come forward and tell everyone the truth, but Timothy begged her not to ruin his chance at having a real family, so she'd stayed silent and hated herself for it. I asked why she was telling me this now. She said because Timothy had shown up at her hotel room the night after our mall conversation absolutely destroyed. He'd admitted that he'd actually developed real feelings for me during our supervised visits, that he'd started to convince himself maybe we could make it work somehow. That's when Angelica realized how deep into this delusion both Timothy and Dad had gotten. The way she described it made me want to throw up. Timothy had apparently convinced himself that since we'd never met until adulthood and didn't grow up together, it wasn't really that wrong, that we could be married and just never tell anyone the truth. Angelica said she'd told him he needed therapy and to stay far away from me and my family. I asked where Timothy was now. Angelica said he'd gone back to Wisconsin. She'd bought him a plane ticket and driven him to the airport herself. She said he was planning to stay with friends there and figure out his life away from all of this. I told her that was probably the smartest decision anyone in this situation had made. Then she asked me about Dad, whether he was still trying to defend himself, or if he'd actually taken responsibility for what he'd done. I told her the truth, that Dad was staying with his brother Francis, and as far as I knew, he was still trying to spin this as a misunderstanding. Angelica shook her head and said that sounded exactly like the man she remembered from 26 years ago. When I finally went back to Mom's house that evening, I found the place full of people. Francis was there with his wife Ivy. Mom's sister Darren had driven up from 2 hours away. Even Melanie was there. Apparently Mom had called her asking for support. They were all in the living room and the conversation stopped when I walked in. Francis looked at me and asked where I'd been. I told them about meeting Angelica and what she'd said about Timothy going back to Wisconsin. Darren wanted to know if we could trust that he'd actually stay away. Francis said it didn't matter because if Timothy showed his face around here again, Francis would personally make sure he regretted it. Mom had been quiet this whole time, but then she spoke up and said we needed to talk about Dad. She'd apparently spent the morning on the phone with a divorce attorney. Not because she definitely decided to divorce him, she made that clear, but because she needed to understand her options. The attorney had told her that Dad's affair and the financial support he'd been sending Timothy all these years would be major factors in any settlement. That's when Francis dropped another bomb. He said Dad had been using money from the family business to send to Timothy. Francis and Dad co-owned a small accounting firm their father had started, and Francis had gone through the books after Dad moved in with him. He'd found regular transfers going to an account in Wisconsin for years. Thousands of dollars that Dad had been hiding from everyone. Mom went very still when she heard this. She asked Francis how much money exactly. He said he was still going through everything, but it looked like at least $70,000 over the years, maybe more. Money that should have been going to business expenses or family savings. Money that Mom had never known about. Ivy started talking about how they needed to confront Dad immediately, that he couldn't just hide out at Francis's house avoiding consequences. Darren agreed and said someone needed to make him face what he'd done to this family. Mom said she wasn't ready to see him yet, but she wanted Francis to tell him that she knew about the money and that her attorney would be contacting him. That night, after everyone left, Mom and I sat in the kitchen and she asked me how I was really doing. Not the polite way people ask when they don't really want to know, but actually asking. I told her honestly that I felt like my entire life had been a lie. That I'd followed every single rule they'd set for me, stayed pure and traditional and obedient, and look where it got me. Almost married to my own brother because Dad was too much of a coward to admit he'd had an affair. Mom started crying, real crying, not the quiet tears she'd been doing since Dad left. She said she'd failed me as a mother, that she should have questioned why Timothy seemed so practiced and perfect, that she should have protected me better. I told her this wasn't her fault, that Dad had lied to both of us. But here's the thing that really got to me. Mom said she'd been thinking about all the rules they'd raised me with. The no dating until marriage thing, the supervised visits, all of it. She said she'd always thought those rules were protecting me, but really they'd just made me vulnerable. I'd never had the chance to date normally, to learn what real relationships felt like, to develop instincts about when something was wrong. I'd been so desperate to follow the rules and make them proud that I'd ignored every red flag with Timothy. She apologized for that, for raising me in a way that made me easy to manipulate. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to be angry at her for it, but mostly I was just tired. The next few days were a blur of canceling wedding vendors. Mom and I divided up the list and started making calls. The venue was the worst because we'd already paid a non-refundable deposit of $3,000. The dress was the hardest part. I'd already had 2 fittings, and the final one was supposed to be next week. The bridal shop said they could resell it if it hadn't been altered too much, but we'd lose half of what we'd paid. I told Mom to sell it. I never wanted to see that dress again. During all of this, Dad kept trying to reach out. He'd text me these long messages about how I needed to understand that he'd only been trying to help Timothy, that bringing him into the family had seemed like the right thing to do, that I was too young to understand how complicated adult relationships were. I finally texted back and told him that manipulating your daughter wasn't complicated. It was evil, and to stop contacting me. He showed up at the house on Thursday. Mom had gone to the grocery store and I was there alone sorting through wedding RSVPs that we needed to uninvite. I heard his key in the lock and came out of the dining room to find him standing in the entryway looking uncomfortable. I asked what he was doing here. He said this was his house too and he had a right to get some of his things. I told him Mom had specifically said he wasn't supposed to come by without calling first. He ignored that and walked past me toward the stairs. I followed him up to the bedroom where he started pulling clothes out of the closet. He tried to make small talk, asking how I was doing and if I'd talked to Timothy. I told him Timothy had gone back to Wisconsin, thank God, and that I'd met with Angelica. Dad froze with a shirt in his hands and asked what she'd told me. I said she'd told me everything. About how he'd promised her he'd leave Mom 26 years ago and then didn't. About how he'd been sending money to Timothy all these years. About how he'd convinced Timothy that marrying me was somehow a legitimate plan. Dad put the shirt down and turned to face me. He tried to explain that things had been complicated back then, that he'd made mistakes but he'd been trying to make them right. I asked him how exactly having me marry my half-brother made anything right. He said if I would just listen, he could explain the whole plan, that it made sense if I understood all the pieces. And that's when I realized Dad actually still thought he'd done nothing wrong. He genuinely believed that his plan had been reasonable and that everyone else was overreacting. He started telling me about how hard it had been to balance supporting Timothy secretly while maintaining his life here. How stressful it was to keep the secret all these years. I cut him off and told him I didn't care. That he'd had 26 years to tell the truth and instead he'd chosen to manipulate everyone around him. That he'd been willing to let me marry Timothy and live a lie forever, just so he didn't have to face consequences for his affair. That he was selfish and delusional, and I wanted nothing to do with him. Dad's face changed then. He got this cold expression and said I was acting like a child throwing a tantrum. That when I matured and had my own adult relationships, I'd understand that sometimes you had to make hard choices. That he'd been protecting me by not telling me the truth sooner. I laughed. I told him that protecting me would have been not introducing me to Timothy in the first place. That protecting me would have been dealing with his own mess instead of dragging me into it. That I'd spent 24 years following every single rule he and Mom had set, being the perfect obedient daughter, and this was how he repaid that trust. He tried to reach for my shoulder and I stepped back. I told him to finish packing his stuff and get out. He asked where he was supposed to go and I said I didn't care. That Francis's house or a hotel or back to Wisconsin were all options, but he wasn't staying here. Mom came home while Dad was still packing. She took one look at his car in the driveway and came inside ready for a fight. She found us both in the bedroom and asked Dad what he thought he was doing. He said he was getting some clothes since he'd been kicked out of his own house. Mom said calmly that he'd kicked himself out when he decided to have an affair and lie about it for 26 years. They started arguing. Real arguing. Not the polite disagreements they'd had throughout my childhood. Mom brought up the money Francis had found, asked Dad how he could steal from his own business and family to support his secret son. Dad tried to say it wasn't stealing. It was his money too. He could use it how he wanted. Mom said that money should have gone to their actual family, to my college fund and their retirement and the mortgage. Dad said Timothy was his actual family too, that he'd had a responsibility to support his son. Mom asked why that responsibility was more important than being honest with his wife and daughter. Dad didn't have an answer for that. The argument went on for maybe 20 minutes before Dad finally grabbed his bag and left. Mom and I stood at the bedroom window watching him drive away. She said she was calling her attorney on Monday to file for divorce. She'd spent the past 2 weeks trying to decide if the marriage could be saved, but after seeing him today, after hearing him still defend his choices, she knew it was over. I asked if she was sure. She said she'd never been more sure of anything, that she'd spent 27 years married to a man who was capable of this level of deception and manipulation, and she was done. The church community found out about everything the following Sunday. I don't know who told them. Maybe Francis or maybe Dad tried to spin his version of events. But by that afternoon, my phone was blowing up with messages from people I barely knew. Mom and I decided not to go to service that day or the next. We needed space from all of it. Melanie came over and we spent the day watching movies and eating pizza and not talking about Dad or Timothy or any of it. It was the first normal day I'd had in weeks. By Monday, Francis had told us that Dad had moved out of his house too. Apparently, Ivy had made it clear that Dad wasn't welcome there anymore after what he'd done. Dad had gotten a short-term rental apartment across town. Francis said Dad was still working at the firm, but they'd had a serious conversation about the money situation and Dad had agreed to pay back everything he'd taken. So that's it. That's the end of this nightmare. My engagement is canceled, my parents are getting divorced, I'm moving out on my own, and I'm starting to build a life that's actually mine, instead of one that follows someone else's rules. And to anyone else out there in a situation where family or religion or tradition is being used to manipulate you, trust your instincts, question everything, and don't be afraid to break the rules when following them means destroying your own life.